Pero hanggang ngayon, ayaw talaga umamin, Mr. President. So paano po natin sila matutulungan?
Thank you, Mr. President. Una, gusto kong sabihin yung aking pagsaludo at pagrespeto sa ating kasama dito sa bulwagang ito kay Senator Bato de la Rosa. I've known him since he became a senator, and in this August chamber, I've learned to know a lot of his characteristics, and one of which, Mr. President, tama po siya. Hindi, what you see is what you get. May masakit siyang masasabi, but that's the truth. Meron siyang masasabing may tatamaan, but that's the truth. Meron din siyang masasabing minsan tatamaan siya, but that's the truth, Mr. President. And importante po ito, at yan yung pagkakagawa sa atin ng Panginoon. Kaya balikan ko po yung Biblia muli, kasi ang Biblia is timeless. Nung tayo po ay nilikha ng Diyos, nilikha niya po tayo ayon sa kanyang wangis. Kaya nga po laging sinasabi na talagang walang hindi maganda at magandang lalaki dito sa mundong ito dahil tayo ay nilikha ayon sa wangis ng Diyos. In His own image. Ang Creator natin, hinulma tayo, ginawa tayo, kinreate tayo out of His image. And as a Creator, meron siyang plano sa atin. Sabi po noong Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know my plans for you," not your brother, not your sister, not your mother or parent or whoever you're looking up to. God said, "For I know my plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and the future." Ang plano ng Diyos sa bawat isa sa atin ay magkaroon ng karakter na kagaya ng ating Panginoon. Hindi po siya diktador. We have to make a choice. Kaya sabi din ng Biblia, "Choose for yourselves whom you will serve." Sabi ni Joshua, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. Doon po sa Biblia, sa Old Testament din, pinapipili po tayo, kasalanan o katwiran, sin or righteousness, sanctity or sin, heaven or hell, God or Satan. And in that decision that we make, at may kasabihan, every decision we make dictates the life we live. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a gift that came from God. And that gift is it's not cheap, Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo. Yung gift na yun is ang kaisa-isang bugtong na anak ng ating Panginoong Yesus. Ang ating Panginoong Diyos, kung hindi ang ating Panginoong Yesus. Yun yung sinasabi ng John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, not to live here on earth luxuriously," bumili ng mga patek, Richard Mille, at magkaroon ng mga helicopter. Hindi, Hindi pinanganak sa Buckingham Palace o sa White House, Mr. President. Pinanganak sa Sabsaban, doon sa Bethlehem. So that He would die someday in a excruciating death in the cross of Calvary. For what, Mr. President? That is for the remission of our sins. Yun po yung kabayaran. Dugo na nabuho doon sa krus ng Kalbaryo. Because it cannot be paid by a human blood, an ordinary man like me or you, Mr. President. Dahil lahat nga po tayo ay may human nature, makasalanan ng lahat. Kailangan puro ang sasagip sa atin. At yun, binigay ng Panginoong Hesus ang kanyang buhay. At hindi po nag-end doon sa cross of Calvary. After 3 days, nabuhay po siya na muli. He conquered death so as to prove to us that even death has no power to limit the power of our God. Now, the question is, paano natin silang maiengganyo na gawin ang tama, huwag magsinungaling? Mr. President, noong kinoronahan ng tinik ang ating Panginoong Hesus, sinasabi ng Biblia, dinidescribe kung paanong umagos yung dugo mula sa kanyang ulo. Siya na walang kasalanan, ginawang kasalanan. Pero ganoon na lang yung pagmamahal ng Diyos sa atin dahil gusto niyang maging kagaya niya tayo, magkaroon tayo ng Christ-like character. Pero kung tayo ay magsisinungaling, kung tayo ay hindi natin bibigyan yung ating mga kababayan ng ayuda at tulong, mga nangangailangan, naghihikahos, isang tuka, pagsasamantalahan pa natin para lamang makuha yung kanilang pirma, para lamang isulong ang pansarili nating kapakanan. O dahil sinusunod lang natin yung utos ni inuman, ni congressman man, o anuman ang posisyon nila. Ipinagpapalit po natin yung ating kaluluwa. Pinagpapalit po natin yung ginawa ng Diyos na pagmamahal sa atin. Yung paano tayo inaruga at minahal ng Diyos, tapos ibabaliwala lang natin dahil sa kasakiman, dahil sa kapangyarihan, dahil sa pagmamahal sa salapi. Don't get me wrong, Mr. President, I'm not talking about money is the root of all evil. No, it is the love for money, the Bible says, which is the root of all evils, Mr. President. And so, I think our people should realize that life is about making choices. our counterparts in the House of Representatives, our fellow Filipinos should realize that life is about making choices. Mahirap po magsinungaling. Nakita niyo po yung mga nagsisinungaling. Alam na natin ngayon kasi may kasabihan yung matatanda, kahit anong bangis ng isda, sa bibig pa rin nahuhuli. So, mahirap po talaga magsinungaling kasi hindi mo yan yung pag-create ng Diyos sa atin eh. Hindi tayo kinreate ng Diyos para magsinungaling, magsabi ng masasama, siraan ng kung sino-sino, at isulong lang yung pansarili nating kapakanan. Last but not the least, Mr. President, I just remember yung James chapter 4, verse 4. God even made that very clear. Sabi ng James 4:4, friendship with this world is enmity with God. So you really have to make a choice. It's either you want to be the friend of God or the friend of this or the enemy of God. You have to make that choice. Either kaibigan ka ba ng Diyos o kaaway ka ng Diyos. There's no middle ground, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, before I close, this is already a closing statement. Just would like to thank the Majority Leader for all the teachings that he has given us. I may be older than him, pero marami pa akong natutunan sa kanya pagdating sa tamang daan kung paano natin gawin yung ating buhay. Maraming salamat, Mr. President. Sana yung lahat ng mga leaders natin ay ganun din. Isang bagay lang hihingi ng taong bayan, yung pagsisinungaling. Kung hindi nagsisinungaling yung leader, ay tama na po yun. Matutuwa na po yung taong bayan yan. Isang trait lang, isang karakter lang ang hinihingi ng mga tao. Yung maging totoo ka at sabihin mo ang totoo. Thank you, Mr. President. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to again thank our distinguished colleague. I remember, Mr. President, when the first part of the pandemic, nung na-COVID po siya, tanda-tanda ko, tinetext niya po ako na he is reading every day yung Psalms 23, beginning verse 1 to verse 6, yung the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I would dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Napakasarap po, Ginoong Pangulo, na pagbulay-bulayin ang salita ng Diyos. Tayo bilang isang tao, isang individual, pag nakakatanggap po tayo ng love letter ng ating minamahal, ng ating crush, kinikilig tayo. Paulit-ulit nating binabasa yung love letter na yon. Imagine, Ginoong Pangulo, binigyan tayo ng love letter ng ating Panginoong Diyos na siyang lumikha sa atin. Mula po sa aklat ng Genesis hanggang pahayag o Book of Revelation. Napakaraming love letter na nakapaloob doon ng ating Panginoong Diyos. And sabi ng Bible, pag hinanap po natin siya, hindi niya ipagkakait ang kanyang sarili. For those who seek Him, He shall be found. Kaya po, napakasarap, Ginoong Pangulo, na laging pag-usapan, maski na once a year dito sa bulwagang ito, ang salita ng Diyos na nagbibigay buhay, pag-asa, kagalingan, at tunay na nagbabago, hindi lamang ng buhay ng tao, kundi buhay ng sambayan ng Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo.
Mr. President, may pahabol ako pala konti. At nabanggit na lang ng ating kasamahan, ng ating Majority Leader, about Psalm 91. Gusto ko pong i-share sa inyo na yung Psalm 91 na yan, hindi ko lang po yung ginagamit noong panahon ng pandemic. Noong kapanahonan pa po na ako'y tinyindi pa hanggang sa nag-retire ako. Every time, magkakanda kami ng combat operations laban sa mga kalaban ng Estado. Bago po kami nagja-jump off ng aking mga tao, may dala po akong bigay sa akin ng nanay ko na handkerchief na naka-imprinta doon. Galing sa El Shaddai yun, Mr. President. Galing sa El Shaddai, naka-imprinta doon yung Psalm 91. Yan po palagi binabasa namin bago kami nagja-jump off. At sa awa ng Diyos, tayo po hindi minalas sa ating mga lakad. Yun lang, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have to correct myself. It was actually Senator Sani Angara, yung Psalm 23. Kay Senator Bato, yung Psalm 91, verses 1 to 16. I can also recite it, Mr. President, but just to give a gist, Mr. President, yung sabi ng verse 1, He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Kaya kung meron tayong pagkukublian, kung meron tayong nais na peace, a place where there is peace that passes all understanding and joy unspeakable. It is in the presence of God. And through the Word of God, talagang mararanasan natin yung kapayapaan na walang katulad, Mr. President. Hindi kayang bilhin ng salapi, hindi kayang ibigay ng sanlibutan, at tanging Panginoong Diyos lamang ang kayang makapagbigay ito. Muli, maraming salamat sa aking distinguished colleague at sa ating mga kasama dito sa Senado. Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo.
Yes, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, at this juncture, and with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Hontiveros, to deliver her speech.
There's no objection. Our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Hontiveros, is now recognized to deliver her privilege speech.
Salamat, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise on a point of personal and collective privilege. I rise not only for myself, I rise for ordinary Filipinos, bewildered at what is happening in the country today. Puro closed-door usap, puro negotiation, kung ano-anong compromise, pero tila napag-iwanan ang bayan. Kahapon, isinagawa ang Bagong Pilipinas Movement na rally sa Quirino Grandstand. Sa Davao naman, may prayer rally. At ngayon, Lunes, nakatayo na tayo sa sangandaan ng kasaysayan. Now that the dust has settled, we can see clearly now. Malinaw na ang lahat sa ating mga kababayan. Ang malinaw sa lahat, parang may mali. Pinangakuan nila tayo ng unity. Pero wala pang midterm, wala na kaagad na kahit anong bahid ng unity. Habang nililito nila tayo dito sa Maynila ng bangkaroteng pirmahan para sa People's Initiative, meron palang gustong bumalik sa kapangyarihan at iwasang panagutan ang kanyang mga kasalanan. Mr. President, nanalo kayo dahil pagod na ang ordinaryong Pilipino sa away at girian. Pero anong ipinakita nyo nitong linggo? Tunggalian na naman, kontrahan na naman. Pinapapili na naman ang mga Pilipino sa pagitan ng dalawang maimpluwensyang pamilya. Sa gitna ng makikintab na entablado, mga sayawan at kantahan, pinapamudmod na pera, at sunod-sunod na political acrobatics at madadramang mga speech sa parehong event, ang tanong pa rin, nasaan na ang ating bansa? Kung tatanungin ang mga Pilipino, ang kailangang tugunan ay ang presyo ng pagkain at ang pagtaas ng sweldo, lalo na ng mga minimum wage earners. Pagpapatigil sa korupsyon, kahirapan at kagutuman ang tapat dapat tutukan. Walang naghahanap ng pagbabago ng konstitusyon, kundi yung mga kahaman. Nagulat na lang tayong lahat na habang nagpapapayak na Noche Buena kasama ang pamilya, na isinusulong na pala ng pailalim ang isang signature campaign para sa Huwad at Bangkaroteng People's Initiative. Hindi pa nauubos ang tirang fruit salad sa refrigerator. Naabot na agad nila ang 3% na kailangang maabot na pirma sa bawat legislative district. At dumating na nga sa paghahakot para sa tinawag nilang Bagong Pilipinas Movement na rally sa Quirino Grandstand. Ang sabi ng Presidential Communications Office o PCO, wala daw itong kinalaman sa tulak para sa People's Initiative. Mawalang galang po. Pero sino po ang niloko ninyo? I would like to show evidence, Mr. President, of how well coordinated that entire exercise was. Government workers were mobilized across agencies. At mayroon pang mga opisina na talagang may tahasang utos sa kanilang mga empleyado na sumama. At ito naman, utos sa mga barangay na magpadala ng mga tao. Worse, ginamit pa ang mga lehitimong serbisyong panglingap para pilitin ang mga vulnerableng tao na dumalo. Ito po, example ng mga AIX payout na ginagawang pabuya para makadalo sa rally. Kaya, hindi po nakapagtataka kung bakit ganoon po kadami ang dumagsa sa Quirino Grandstand kahapon. Ito po kumikinang sa kaputian ang mga video. Ginagawa po tayong mga tanga kung ang ipipilit ng PCO na wala itong kinalaman sa charter change na ang pinaka-uma at ikabong usapin ngayon. Hindi po tayo pinanganak kahapon para utuin nila na ito ay paraan para, and I quote, Yusek Bara, quote, ma-communicate ng pamahalaan ang kanyang commitment to level up its services, close quote. Mag-level up lang pala ng service, bakit kailangan pa ng rally? Gawin nyo na lang po. I have evidence, Mr. President, that payouts were taking place at the rally and given to those who signed the petition or mobilized others to sign the petition. Ito po, patikim. Again, now that the dust has settled at nakapagbaklas na sila ng mga LED screen at mga stage, hindi naman ito tungkol sa bagong Pilipinas o sa bagong mukha ng Pilipinas. Hindi ito tungkol sa patriotismo o pagmamahal sa bayan. Tinipon ang mga kababayan natin para sa mga pirma nila, kasama ang napakaraming mga souvenir. But they will not bewilder the Filipino people with their simultaneously launched initiatives and perfectly edited videos. We will not let them glorify themselves as defenders of democracy and the rule of law. Mr. President, dear colleagues, my fellow Filipinos, ito lang ang dapat nating maintindihan sa nangyayaring alitan tungkol sa charter change. Hindi ito alitan lamang ng Senado at ng House of Representatives. Huwag niyo kaming pagsabunin na parang mga Kristong nanghahanap ng mas marami pang tataya. Kinabukasan natin ang pinag-uusapan dito. Kaya bigyan naman natin ng dangal at respeto ang saligang batas. Of course, this is an attempt to ease the Senate out by introducing the sentence voting jointly. But wait, there's more. The bigger story is that by sheer mathematical numbers, the House of Representatives, the leadership of which is by tradition aligned with the executive, could unilaterally change the Constitution according to the dictates and desires of the sitting President. Hindi lang po ito si Presidente ngayon, kundi ang lahat ng susunod na President sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas. Paano kung ang susunod na liderato ay gustong padaliin ang proseso ng pagdeklara ng martial law o tanggalin ang karapatan ng mga manggagawa? Paano kung gusto lusawin ang Bill of Rights o tanggalin ang term limits ng presidente? Katawa-tawa naman yan na pag ang usapin ay papalitan ng pangalan ng kalsada o kaya gagawa ng National High School, sasabihin magkahiwalay na pa siya ng Senado at HOR. Pero para sa usapin ng saligang batas na kaluluwa ng bansa, House lang ang magpapasya. If we allow this, we do not just unbalance the powers of the Senate vis-a-vis the House of Representatives. We weaken our democracy. We render our democracy unrecognizable. And yet, Mr. President, mga minamahal kong kababayan, hindi natin kailangan mamili sa dalawang nag-uumpugang mga bato. Lalo na kung ang tanging inihain lang naman sa handaan ay kahirapan at korupsyon. There is always an alternative. At ang unity natin, hindi unity ng mga makakapangyarihang pamilya na may agenda, kundi unity ng mga ordinaryong mamamayan na nagmamahal sa ating bansa. Sa tunay na bagong Pilipinas, Walang baho ng formally na sa kalagitnaan ng COVID, nangurakot pa sa kaban ng bayan. Huwag po nating kalimutan ang mga Michael Yang at iba pang cronies at kawatan na binigyan ng easy access pass sa bansang ito. Sa tunay na bagong Pilipinas, walang agricultural smuggling at hindi binibigyan ng special treatment ang mga paboritong importer. Sa tunay na bagong Pilipinas, walang confidential funds para sa mga di karapat-dapat na civilian agencies at walang 125 billion na naubos ng 11 days. Sa tunay na bagong Pilipinas, matapang na humaharap sa China at pinagtatanggol ang ating karagatan at ang ating mangingisda. Hindi pinamimigay ang ating yaman dagat at nagtatago sa saya ng mga trolls. Sa tunay na bagong Pilipinas, walang EJ case, walang kaduda-dudang Maharlika Fund, at tunay na malaya ang bawat Pilipino. Kay Presidente at sa mga naghahari-harian sa Davao, we see through you. We see through your lies and grandiose promises. You will not divide us. Hindi niyo mabubuwag ang demokrasya at kalayaan sa bansang ito. And to my fellow Filipinos, let us speak truth to power. Uncover reality. It is only with truth that we strike our path amidst the smoke and mirrors. What is at stake is the future of the Philippines, not just the future of the Dutertes or the future of the President's family. Mabuhay ang Senado at higit, mabuhay ang sambayanan. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hontiveros, for that very... Okay.
Yes, so there being no objection, ask the Secretary to read the title and proceed with the reference of business.
Message of the President of the Philippines, letter of His Excellency President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr., dated 29 November 2023, submitting for the Senate's consideration and concurrence the International Labor Organization Convention Number 81, or the Convention Concerning Labor Inspection in Industry and Commerce, which was adopted by the General Conference of the ILO on 11 July 1947 in Geneva, Switzerland.
To the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Senate Bills on First Reading. Senate Bill Number 2522, an act establishing National Preventive Mechanism, NPM, in compliance with the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment of Cut and for Other Purposes by Senators Tolentino and De La Rosa.
To the Committees on Justice and Finance.
Senate Bill Number 2523, an act amending Republic Act Number 11959, otherwise known as the Regional Specialty Centers Act and for other purposes by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Health and Labour.
Senate Bill Number 2524, an act establishing the Bulacan Airport City Special Economic Zone and Free Port in the province of Bulacan, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committee on Economic Affairs, Local Government, Ways and Means of Finance.
Senate Bill Number 2525, an act establishing a general hospital in the municipality of San Dionisio, province of Iloilo, to be known as the Northern Iloilo General Hospital and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Angara.
To the Committee on Rules.
Senate Bill Number 2526, an act regulating the ownership and operation of drones by private persons by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Public Services, Trade and Commerce and Entrepreneurship.
Senate Bill Number 2527, an act providing for a value for money procurement, amending for the purpose or Republic Act Number 9184, otherwise known as the Government Procurement Reform Act, and for other purposes by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Finance.
Resolutions. PSR Number 913, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the disappearance of beauty queen Catherine Camilon by Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PSR Number 914, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resource Development to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the unscrupulous practice of the International Solid Waste Integrated Management Specialists Incorporated in engaging the services of garbage collectors by circumventing pertinent laws in gross disregard of their rights as workers by Senator Estrada.
To the Committee on Labor and Employment.
PSR number 915, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the implementation by the Department of Health of the legal instruments issued by the World Health Organization with the end in view of formulating standards to discern which of the issuances issued by the World Health Organization should pass Senate scrutiny before their implementation by the Department of Health by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
PSR number 916, resolution amending Section 42, Rule 14 of the Rules of the Senate pertaining to the conduct of sessions by Senators Tolentino and De La Rosa.
To the Committee on Rules, additional reference of business. Please proceed.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 29 November 2023, it passed the following House Bill in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Bill number 9470, an act creating one additional branch of regional trial court in the municipality of Labason, province of Zamboanga del Norte, and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9471, an act creating 4 additional branches of the municipal trial court in the municipalities of Dayadi, Quezon, Santa Fe, and Alfonso Castañeda, province of Nueva Vizcaya, and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9472, an act creating 4 additional branches of municipal trial court in General Santos City, province of South Cotabato, and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9473, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC and 2 additional MTC in the municipality of Ibajay, province of Aklan, and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9474, an act creating 6 additional branches of RTC in the cities of Silay and Victorias, province of Negros Occidental, and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9475, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the municipality of La Paz, province of Abra, and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9476, an act creating 1 additional branch of MTC in the municipality of La Trinidad, province of Benguet. House Bill number 9477, an act creating 2 additional branches of RTC in the municipality of Candihay and Valencia, province of Bohol. House Bill number 9478, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the city of Cabancalan, province of Negros Occidental. House Bill number 9479, an act creating 2 additional branches of RTC in the city of Maasin and in the municipality of Sogod, province of Southern Leyte. House Bill 9480, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the municipality of Suluk, province of Davao del Sur. House Bill number 9481, an act creating 4 additional branches of RTC in the municipalities of Rosario and San Juan, province of Batangas. House Bill number 9482, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the municipality of San Miguel, province of Zamboanga del Sur. House Bill number 9483, an act creating 10 additional branches of RTC and 3 additional branches of MTC in the city of Santa Rosa, province of Laguna. House Bill number 9484, an act creating 2 additional branches of RTC in the municipality of Labo, province of Camarines Norte. House Bill number 9485, an act creating 1 additional branch of MTC in the municipality of Socorro, province of Surigao del Norte. House Bill number 9486, an act creating 8 additional branches of RTC in the city of Caloocan. House Bill number 9487, an act creating 2 additional branches of MTC in the municipalities of Santa Barbara and Pavia, province of Iloilo. House Bill number 9488, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the municipality of Moalboal, province of Cebu. House Bill number 9489, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the municipality of Alicia, province of Isabela. House Bill number 9490, an act creating 4 additional branches of RTC in the 11th Judicial Region and appropriating funds therefor. House Bill number 9491, an act creating 3 additional branches of RTC in the city of Pasig and in the municipality of Dumangas, province of Iloilo. House Bill number 9492, an act creating 2 additional branches of RTC and 2 additional branches of municipal trial court in the city of Mati, province of Davao Oriental. House Bill number 9493, an act creating 4 additional branches of RTC, 2 of which to be designated as family courts, to be stationed in the municipalities of Brooks Point and Coron, and 2 of which to be designated as special courts for environmental cases in the municipalities of Coron and Rojas, all in the province of Palawan. House Bill 9494, an act creating 2 additional branches of municipal trial court in the city of Tagum, province of Davao del Norte. House Bill 9495, an act creating 1 additional branch of RTC in the municipality of Maramag, province of Bukidnon. And House Bill 9496, an act creating 2 additional branches of RTC in the city of Ilagan and in the municipality of Tumawini, province of Isabela.
All referred to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
Second edition.
There's a second, please proceed on the second additional reference, please.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 29 November 2023, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Bill number 9396, an act declaring the waters surrounding Panawan Island in the municipalities of Liloan, Pintuyan, San Francisco, and San Ricardo in the province of Southern Leyte, a protected area with a category of protected seascape under the National Integrated Protected Area System to be referred to as the Panawan Island Protected Seascape, providing for its management, appropriating funds therefore.
Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
House Bill number 9519, an act declaring the acacia trees in the municipality of Binalonan, province of Pangasinan as local heritage trees and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Culture, the Arts, and Local Government and Finance.
House Bill number 9468, an act establishing a district office of the Land Transportation Office in the municipality of Pandan, province of Antique. House Bill number 9469, an act converting the Land Transportation Office or the NETA District Office into a Class A District Office, renaming the same as the Land Transportation Office, Binalonan District Office, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Public Services and Finance.
House Bill number 9500, an act changing the name of New Partido High School in Barangay Catagbacan, Municipality of Goa, Province of Camarines Sur to New Partido National High School. And House Bill number 9501, an act changing the name of San Sebastian Fisheries High School in Barangay San Sebastian, Municipality of Lagonay, Province of Camarines Sur to San Sebastian National High School.
To the Committee on Basic Education.
House Bill number 9507, an act establishing a Technical Education and Skills Development Authority Training and Assessment Center in the 6th Congressional District of Quezon City and appropriating funds therefore. House Bill number 9508, an act establishing a Technical Education and Skills Development Authority Training and Assessment Center in the municipality of Kawayan, province of Biliran and appropriating funds therefore. House Bill number 9509, an act establishing a Technical Education and Skills Development Authority Training and Assessment Center in the municipality of Rizal, province of Nueva Ecija, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education and Finance.
House Bill number 9504, an act establishing a special economic zone in the city of Bacolod, province of Negros Occidental, creating for the purpose the Bacolod Special Economic Zone Authority and appropriating funds therefore. House Bill number 9505, an act establishing a special economic zone in the province of Bohol, creating for the purpose the Northern Bohol Special Economic Zone Authority and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs, Local Government, Ways and Means and Finance.
Third additional.
The last third additional reference of business.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 12 December 2023, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Bill number 9682, an act institutionalizing the grant of teaching supplies allowance for public school teachers and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Basic Education and Finance.
House Bill number 9588, an act requiring all graduating senior high school and college students to plant 2 trees each as a civic duty for environment protection and preservation and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Basic Education, Higher Technical Vocational Education and Finance.
House Bill number 9587, an act requiring parents to plant 2 trees for every child born to them and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
House Bill number 8525, an act mandating the formulation, financing, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of a comprehensive and multi-year Tatak Pinoy, Proudly Filipino strategy establishing a Tatak Pinoy Council and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Ways and Means and Public Services.
Sorry, to the archives.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. To the archives, just skip one. To the
House Bill
archives.
number 9647, an act renaming motor vehicle users charge into motor vehicle road users tax and increasing the rates for public utility vehicle modernization and road safety programs, amending for the purpose RA 8794, entitled an act imposing a motor vehicle users charge on owners of all types of motor vehicles and for other purposes, as amended by RA number 11239.
To the Committees on Ways and Means and Public Services.
House Bill number 9648, an act providing for cost-effective, transparent, competitive, streamlined, sustainable, active, and inclusive procurement activities of the government, repealing for the purpose RA 9184, otherwise known as the Government Procurement Reform Act.
To the Committee on Finance.
House Bill number 9662, an act establishing a framework for blue economy, promoting stewardship and sustainable development of coastal and marine ecosystems and resources, reorganizing and renaming the National Coast Watch System as the National Maritime Monitoring System and providing funds therefor.
Committee on Economic Affairs, Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
House Bill number 9663, an act establishing the national framework for water resource management and creating the Department of Water Resources and the Water Regulatory Commission, defining their mandates, powers, and functions, and appropriating funds therefor.
To the Committees on Public Services, Civil Service, and Finance.
House Bill number 9673, an act providing for the revised Cooperative Code of the Philippines.
To the Committee on Cooperatives, Constitutional Amendments, Ways and Means of Finance.
House Bill number 9674, an act providing for the revised Government Auditing Code of the Philippines.
To the Committees on Constitutional Amendments, Civil Service and Finance.
House Bill number 9034, an act establishing the archipelagic sea lanes in the Philippines, archipelagic waters, prescribing the rights and obligations of foreign ships and aircraft exercising the right of archipelagic sea lanes passage.
To the committees, to the Special Committee on Philippine Maritime and Admiralty Zones.
House Bill number 9430, an act further strengthening union organization and disallowing cancellation of union registration, amending for the purpose Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines.
To the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resource Development.
House Bill number 9506, an act establishing a rental housing subsidy program for informal settler families and appropriating funds therefor.
To the Committees on Urban Planning, Housing, and Finance.
And House Bill number 8841, an act establishing the Bulacan Airport City Special Economic Zone and Freeport in the province of Bulacan, creating for the purpose the Bulacan Airport City Special Economic Zone and Freeport Authority, and appropriating funds therefor.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs, Local Government, Ways and Means, and Finance. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we insert into the record the privileged speech of Senator Lauren Legarda on the 5th anniversary of the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. So move, Mr. President.
There will be no objection. Motion is approved. There's a query, Majority Leader, when we will elect the new members of the CA.
One in China, one in France, one in Indonesia, one in Malaysia, one in Saudi Arabia, one in Pakistan, and one in Thailand. The rank of these police attaches, Mr. President, are police colonel, except the United States, particularly Washington, D.C., which will hold the rank of Police Brigadier General.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no issue with the rank. My question has been, what do you mean by other jurisdictions? Kasi itong provision nyo states that there will be you will field more officers as police attaches in other jurisdiction. Ang tanong ko, sa buong mundo, dun ba sa allies natin, dun ba sa mga strategic locations, saan po tong other locations? It has to be more clearly defined. Yun lang naman po.
Other jurisdictions
As determined
means
by...
these eight jurisdictions, Mr. President. Itong 8 na ito.
Your Honor, what Mr. President, may I be clarified that what His Honor means is, at present, we do have 8 and we are just institutionalizing that 8 by including this provision.
Correct, Mr. President. Your
Would
Honor.
His Honor like to mention those 8? Because, again, as I said, when it just says in other jurisdictions, it presupposes that it's in some jurisdictions now and that there will be other jurisdictions where these positions would be filled. So I think an amendment is necessary to clarify, Mr.
Yes,
President.
I agree, Mr. President, Your Honor. We have to cite this, specify this in our amendment, and plus future,
Yes.
because the need of establishing a police attaché depends on the need of the OFWs in those territories.
Understand, Mr. President. And that's why the law should somehow define how the implementer of this law will determine what jurisdictions they will include. So as His Honor said, that will be determined where there are a lot of OFWs and they are needed. And then perhaps that is the wording that should be included in the
Yes.
following, not limited to the following, and possibly subject to style, other areas where the need for, I don't know, protection? I cannot provide the language, but if His Honor understands the point I am making, we are happy to review the language that His Honor feels would be best.
Yeah, I get the point of the good gentlewoman from Taguig and Pateros, Mr. President, and can I request, Mr. President, that we'll just go back to
Yes,
this
of course.
particular
We can move
amendment and move on?
Of course.
After we have modified the wording subject to style?
Yes, may I just add one more point, Mr. President? Tama ho ba, Mr. President, that there are also attachés from the Department of Defense in these critical areas, and would those areas somehow overlap?
Correct, Mr. President. We have also defense attachés in those jurisdictions, but there is no overlapping of function because they concentrate on defense and the police attaché concentrates on police matters. Like, for example, our OFWs who are having problems with law enforcement or they are facing cases, these are the defense attachés cannot ably represent our government to these OFWs.
We understand, Mr. President. But with the example His Honor gave, would the position that needs to be filled now, would it not be a lawyer other than a police officer? Because if our kababayans are involved in a law enforcement operation and a case is filed against them, police ho ba ang kailangan nila o abogado?
Well, Mr. President, Your Honor, most of the time, because there should be police-to-police coordinations, the police agency of the host country and the police agency of the ones that were aggrieved, Mr. President. So, nag-uusap lang po sila. Nag-uusap po sila, police to police. So,
Are you just Honor sure about that? Because in my mind, and my humble mind, I'm not an expert, parang abogado ho yung kailangan yata ng OFW. Hindi ho ako aware na tinatawag police.
Well, iba yung legal attaché, iba rin yung police attaché, Mr. President, because iba po yung trabaho nila.
So, Mr. President, may I give an example? If in case an OFW is accused of, nangyari na ho to, no, na pinatay niya yung amo niya dahil nilapastangan siya, ang kailangan ng OFW natin is police doon sa ibang jurisdiction?
There are matters that has to be taken care of by the police.
Paano
Mr.
mo
President,
magko-coordinate yung police ho doon? Kasi sa pagkakaintindi ko, abogado ho ang kumakausap doon. Or they
Well,
work together.
there are times, Mr. President, that we need to coordinate with the police in the area, in the host country. So we need the police officer coming from us to coordinate with them.
Anyway, Mr. President, I take note of the answer of the good sponsor. I will also do some quick research because I am very happy to support, Mr. President, but given the limited resources, sinisigurado ko lang na kung sino yung kailangan, kasi pwede ko rin hong i-propose na kung as a bill for the OFW committee, our committee on, what's the name of our committee, DMW? Migrant workers. To consider deploying lawyers other than police, given the limited resources. So anyway, I will hold that part of my amendment, Mr. President, and do a little bit of research. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, Mr. President.
President,
Senator Tolentino is recognized.
I just have one clarificatory question concerning the police attachés posted overseas. May we know from the gentleman if there is a fixed term or tenure insofar as the posting is concerned. Ganun katagal po sila? 2 years? 1 year? Kasi yung cycle ng promotion, Mr. President. Kasi dapat po nakalagay din na ikaw ay itatalagang police attaché in a certain jurisdiction for a period of 3 years, 2 years? Or
Maximum of 3 years as practiced by the PNP right now, Mr. President.
Don't you think-
Maximum of 3 years.
Don't you think, Mr. President, this should be part of the law itself?
We can do it if we want to include that in this amendment.
For instance, in current diplomatic practice, the posting of an ambassador may not exceed 3 years.
Yes, Mr. President.
That's part of existing legislation, not just tradition. So, will the gentleman include a period, a maximum period, a ceiling, Mr. President?
Okay.
2 years?
Yes,
ano
Your
ba?
Honor, Mr. President.
2 years or
3.
3 years? 3 years, Mr. President. That's my amendment, if the gentleman will accept.
Yeah, subject to style,
Subject
Mr.
to style.
President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Joe, gawin niyo. Pinagdag yan, 2 years.
So may I just ask our colleagues, Senator Bato, was it accepted by the body? There's no objection for Senator Pia? Or there's an amendment to the amendment? Oh, i-park mo na, okay.
We are going to go back to the amendment of Senator Pia,
Please proceed.
Mr. President.
Please
Yeah.
proceed.
On page 15, excuse me, Mr. President. Dito na tayo na. On page 18, line 8, after the first article, delete the following. Chairman of I so move, Mr. President.
There have been objection, amendments adopted.
On page 26, line 12, after the phrase Deputy Director, insert the following. For administration with the rank of Police Colonel, Deputy Director for Information and Technology Matters, who is a non-uniform personnel with at least salary grade 25. I so move, Mr. President.
There have been no objection, amendment is approved.
On the same page, line 13, delete comma and the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On page 28, line 20, delete the word brigadier and replace it with major. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 29, after the word director, insert the following with the rank of police brigadier general. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 29, delete comma and the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 31, line 17, after the word administration, insert
Yes,
the following.
My dear colleague, would like to recognize Senator Pia Cayetano.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. President, my amendment is on page 29, lines 1 to 9. And
29.
for ease of understanding, I'll just read the whole paragraph. It's a new paragraph, Mr. President. Insert a new section which will read as follows. Subsection number 13, Recruitment and Selection Service. Headed by a director with the rank of Police Brigadier General, the Recruitment and Selection Service shall institutionalize the implementation of the PNP Recruitment and Selection Program to ensure the entry and equal representation of qualified and competent uniformed personnel in the PNP, regardless of sex, ethnic origin, religious beliefs, political affiliation, and social class, provided that the active recruitment all over the country shall be conducted. The director shall be assisted by a deputy director and a chief of staff, both with the rank of police colonel. We submit, Mr. President.
I wholeheartedly accept the said amendment, Mr. President.
There be no objection by the sponsor, then it means the amendment's accepted.
Thank you.
Please proceed, the sponsor.
On the same page, line 29, delete comma and the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments accepted. Approved.
On page 31, line 17.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I still have one more on page 29. I'm sorry,
Ay, sorry.
I missed it.
Sorry,
Yes,
sorry.
please proceed, ma'am.
Okay.
This one, Mr. President, is on page 29. After line 9, insert a new paragraph, which will read as follows. Sa paragraph 14, Futures Thinking Office. Headed by a director with the rank of Police Brigadier General, the Futures Thinking Office shall strategically anticipate, prepare, and train PNP personnel for emerging challenges, technological advancements, and evolving criminal patterns and other future scenarios that will enhance public order and safety and law enforcement effectiveness. Next paragraph. The director shall be assisted by a multidisciplinary team with expertise in areas such as futures thinking, criminology, technology, foresight methodologies, and strategic planning. We submit, Mr. President.
I accept, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I leave it to His Honor if it is his desire that this be headed by a director with the rank of Police Brigadier General. Medyo kayo po ang expert dyan kung anong level of expertise ang kailangan, Mr. President, or anong level of seniority
It should
ang
be
kailangan.
Police Brigadier General,
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. So the amendment was accepted by the sponsor. Please proceed.
On page 31, line 17, the word administration, insert the following. With the rank of Police Brigadier General, I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 18, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On page 31, line 26, after the word administration, insert the following. With the rank of Police Brigadier General, I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 27, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 32, line 3, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 4, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 32, line 16, after the word safety, insert the following, provided that the Aviation Security Group shall have concurrent jurisdiction and authority with all airport police or security group over airport premises in the country. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 32, line 17, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 18, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. So, I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 25, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, the following amendment is from Senator Alan Peter Cayetano. On page 33, delete the entire paragraph found in lines 14 to 17 and replace it with, the director shall be assisted by a deputy director for administration with the rank of Police Brigadier General and a deputy director for operations and chief of staff, both with the rank of police colonel, provided that notwithstanding any law or rule to the contrary, there shall be a sufficient number of personnel at the Regional Forensic Unit, National Capital Region, adjusted as needed to the duties and responsibilities of the unit and to the demand for forensic services in the region as determined by the Chief of the PNP. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 25, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 26, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is an amendment from Senator Riza Hontiveros. On page 35, line 21, insert a new paragraph that reads, the group shall closely coordinate with the PNP Internal Affairs Service to ensure that the proper administrative charges are filed against PNP personnel involved in illicit acts. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 36, lines 15 to 16, after the word members, delete the following. Assigned in Metropolitan Manila, chartered cities, and first-class municipalities. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is a joint amendment by this representation and Senator Alan Peter Cayetano. On page 36, line 27, after the word year, insert the following. Provided further that the uniformed personnel who have less than 1 year in the service upon the effectivity of this act shall have the option to compulsorily retire at the age of 56. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved. Your Honor, just a question. So this we already inserted the increase in age to 57.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, to be at par with the armed
Armed
forces.
Forces of the Philippines.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Pimentel, sir.
Just to be very clear on the last amendment we already approved, we are referring to uniformed personnel who would have less than a year of service left when,
Yes,
when
Mr.
it becomes
President.
effective.
Yeah.
If it's an option, Mr. President, why are we using the word option to compulsorily retire, Mr. President?
Option to compulsorily retire, Mr. President.
If it's an option, it does not belong to the concept of compulsion, Mr. President. So what do we want here to happen? That if the uniformed personnel who will have less than a year left in their less than a year in service before reaching the age of 56, are those the people covered?
Yes, Mr.
Upon
President.
effective, shall have the option to retire.
Yes.
Okay, that's what we want, Mr. President. So anyway, at any rate, Mr. President, with the permission of our sponsor, after the period of amendment, we will ask for a clean copy. Okay lang ba yun? So we can revisit if we have captured what we want in that, if it's very clear, this one.
Yes, Mr. President.
Anyway, we have already approved this, Mr. President. Just Just calling the attention, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, please proceed, Ma'am Risa. Our distinguished colleague.
Salamat kayo, Mr. President. Clarification to the good chair and sponsor about an anterior amendment. The good sponsor already read this representation's amendment to page 35 after line 20. I'd just like to clarify, Mr. President, with the good sponsor, it had been my understanding that the proposed amendment that would be accepted by the good sponsor, would read, "The group shall closely coordinate with the PNP Internal Affairs Service to ensure that the proper administrative and/or criminal charges are filed against PNP personnel involved in illicit acts." What the good sponsor read was to ensure that the proper administrative charges are filed against. So I'd just like to clarify, Mr. President, with the good sponsor, kung ano po yung proposed amendment ng representasyong ito na tinanggap nila.
Well, we can, ano nangyari ba? No problem, Mr. President, Your Honor. We can add the criminal
And/or criminal charges.
Yeah, no
good
problem.
sponsor.
I accept.
Dagang salamat. Salamat kayo, Mr. President.
Thank you. The amendment's accepted for the record. So, was this an amendment or an amendment earlier made? Yes, could you clarify, Minority Floor Leader?
Yes, it appears that it's an amendment to the amendment because hindi lang na nagkukulang yung wording sa Mr. President.
Okay. Subject to style?
Subject to style.
Subject to style. And anyway, we're gonna have a clean copy tonight so that tomorrow we can review again. Please proceed, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. On page 39, line 3, after the acronym PNP, insert the following: provided that the order of preventive suspension issued by the aforementioned officers may be modified or reversed by their immediate supervisors. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments accepted. Approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is an amendment from Senator Risa Hontiveros. On page 39, line 7, insert a new section which will contain amendments to Section 39 of Republic Act Number 8551 to wit. Section 15, Section 39 of Republic Act Number 8551 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 39, Creation, Powers, and Functions. An Internal Affairs Service of the PNP is hereby created under the office of the Chief of the PNP, which shall, the full text of the amendments is being shown on the screen. It seeks to insert the phrase under the office of the Chief of the PNP to indicate where the IAS will be in the PNP organizational structure. It also seeks to amend subparagraph E to mandate IAS to closely coordinate with the Integrity and Monitoring Enforcement Group, file the proper criminal cases against erring PNP members. This amendment also touches on the list of cases where IAS shall conduct automatic investigation, such as, number 1, under subparagraph B, we add the phrase during, in connection with, or as a result of the conduct of a police operation. Number 2, under subparagraph D, we add where the suspect dies or is seriously injured. And number 3, there is a new subparagraph F, incidents where a police personnel is allegedly involved in the crimes including murder, kidnapping, and serious illegal detention, robbery, abuse of, or violence against women or children, trafficking in persons, or any other crime involving moral turpitude, subject to style. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
After the new Section 15, insert a Section 16 to read as follows. Section 16, Section 40 of Republic Act Number 8551 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 40, Organization, National, Regional, and Provincial Offices of the Internal Affairs shall be established. Internal Affairs Service shall be headed by an Inspector General who shall be assisted by a Deputy Inspector General with the rank of Police Major General. The Regional Internal Affairs Offices shall be headed by a Regional Director with the rank of Police Brigadier General, while the Provincial Offices shall be headed by a Provincial Director, provided that the head of the Internal Affairs Service shall be a civilian who shall meet the qualification requirements provided herein. The Commission shall establish a rationalized staffing pattern in the reorganization plan as provided for in Section 13 hereof. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendments approved.
After the new Section 16, insert a new Section 17 to read as follows. Section 41, Section 17, Section 41 of Republic Act number 8551 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 41, appointments. The Inspector General shall be appointed by the President upon the recommendation of the Chief of the PNP and duly endorsed by the Commission, and shall be coterminous with the appointing authority without reappointment or extension unless earlier removed from office for just cause. Appointments of personnel who shall occupy various positions shall be made by the Inspector General and shall be based on the established career pattern and criteria to be promulgated by the Commission. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
After the new Section 17, insert a new Section 18 to read as follows. Section 18, applicability. The provisions of this Act shall have retroactive effect on the rights and benefits granted by virtue of appointment, promotion, or retirement prior to its effectivity. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
Renumber all sections accordingly, subject to style. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
That would be all, Mr. President. Thank you.
All
Mr.
the amendments subject to style, so that we can,
okay, Mr.
Secretariat can review the, to make sure that we have no styling problems. And to issue a clean copy by tomorrow, so that
Yes,
we
Mr.
can
President.
approve this on second reading.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, our distinguished minority floor leader is recognized. Senator Coco Pimentel.
With the permission of our sponsor, if I can just ask a question on one of the early amendments, Mr. President, yung sa page 7, line 20, just so that nasa records po, we inserted before the word operational, page 7, line 20, before the word operational, we inserted administrative and. So what would be the big difference, Mr. President?
The big difference, Mr. President, right now, the EPCs are only having operational control over the existing regional mobile force battalions. So hanggang deployment lang sila, limited to deployment of these units. But administratively, wala silang control. They are not the ones appointing for people who will man the regional mobile force battalion. So kulang yung power nila, Mr. President, hanggang operational lang. So sayang yung kanilang rango na 3-star general kung ang kanilang powers and responsibilities are not commensurate to the rank that they are having. So minabuti po natin na including administrative powers, ibigay na rin sa kanila para sila na ang maghanap, mag-determine kung sino mga tao na i-recruit nila to man the Regional Mobile Force Battalion, Mr. President.
So sino pong natanggalan natin nung administrative power na yon?
The Regional Director, Mr. President.
Regional.
Because right now, the Regional Directors are the one appointing the new members of the Regional Mobile Force Battalion.
Okay, so and that's very clear, Mr. President. Wala namang, hindi tayo magkakaroon ng turf war dito na
There's no turf war.
baka may wording tayo na naiwan pa yung administrative power sa regional director.
Yeah, there's no turf war here, Mr. President.
Klaro na naangat na natin dun sa APC.
Yes, Mr. President, because if you do not include the administrative powers, these 3-star generals heading the EPCs cannot discipline administratively these erring personnel of the Regional Mobile Force Battalion. Hanggang deployment lang sila. Pero pag ito'y nagluloko, ito'y gumawa ng kalukuhan, ang administrative powers belong to the Regional Director. So minabuti natin na elevate to the APC.
Ang hinahanap ko actually, Mr. President, is yung counterpart amendment na klinaro na inalis naman natin sa Regional Director yung administrative power. Kasi siningit, we just inserted two words, administrative and then sabi natin, lumipat na ngayon yung administrative power from the regional to the APC. But wala ba tayong corresponding amendment to clarify na tinanggal na nga natin yung administrative powers ng regional?
There's none, Mr. President, because there's no need, Mr. President, because it is understood that if we give the power, administrative powers to these APCs, APC commanders, it is already removed from the regional directors.
Okay, so what law gave the power to the regional directors in the first place, Mr. President?
RA 6975. It's RA 6975, Mr. President.
Anyway, we just make sure, Mr. President, na walang ambiguity, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anyway, we will ask for a clean copy.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Yes, Senator Tolentinos.
Just one follow-up germane question. May I know from the good sponsor, if there are provisions as being submitted right now for amendments that would include special police districts.
Special police?
Yes, police districts. Because I recall, Mr. President, that I was the one who sponsored the creation of a Metro Davao Police Force. Is this included in the measure?
Hindi mo sinama?
Is this included in the measure? It's a special law headed by a one-star general, Mr. President. So, for purposes of consistency, Mr. President, I think that should likewise be mentioned as part of this measure.
Mr. President, at the metropolitan level, there shall be a district office headed by a district director. So,
With the rank of...
with the at the provincial headed by district director, and the district director is having the rank of one-star general, brigadier general. So it follows that the metropolitan Davao
Police District is
police
covered,
district
is covered by this measure.
this general provision, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you,
Mr.
Majority Leader.
President, to allow our colleagues, Mr. President, to study further, a lot of our colleagues back there are asking for a clean copy. May I just move that we suspend right now the consideration of Senate Bill number 2449. So move,
Yes,
Mr. President.
Elementary status of this bill is that we are in the period of interpellation. With that, I move to resume the period of interpellation. Recognize the sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to continue with this interpellation, our Minority Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel.
Our distinguished sponsor, Senator Wing Gatchalian of the City of Valenzuela, and our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and as stated by our acting, the Assistant Majority Leader, we are continuing with our interpellation. So, I think the last time, Mr. President, sabi yun, November? December? Christmas, ano yata yun?
Christmas party,
Yeah,
Mr.
Christmas
President.
party day.
Before the Christmas party, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. So, before the People's Initiative consciousness,
Bruhaha,
we
Mr.
were not
President.
conscious about any People's Initiative that time, Mr. President.
Before the PI Bruhaha, Mr. President.
So I think that since the BLGF personnel were there, I also wanted to ask, are they present now?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes,
they're
I
present.
wanted to ask what would be the budgetary implication of this bill? Kasi as I recall it, if this bill becomes law, we will have to expand the manpower, the complement of BLGF, and they will do a lot of coordinating activities, Mr. President. So,
Yes, Mr. President.
in short, may we have may we have an idea on the budgetary implication of our bill, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Let me just get my notes, Mr. President. Yeah. Mr. President, we ran some simulation, and the budgetary allocation per year is 66 million, Mr. President, for the additional 66 million for the BLGF, Mr. President. This will cover the expanded role of the BLGF and the supervisory as well as monitoring responsibilities, Mr. President.
Will this bill require the BLGF to be always in constant touch with each LGU, including municipalities? We have at more than 1,400 municipalities.
Well, Mr. President, in practice, based on my experience, they are in constant touch and they are reachable when LGUs need advice, especially on improving their local tax collections, Mr. President. Based on my experience, the BLGF's direction is to empower our local government units. So the empower in terms of local tax collection so that they will be independent as much as possible from national grants or national allocations, Mr. President.
So, but then we reach this conclusion that we need this bill, Mr. President. So, what has happened? How come parang BLGF has failed in its role to help the local governments increase their local revenues through efficient use of local taxation, Mr. President?
Well, Mr.
Kasi
President,
umabot pa tayo sa we need this bill to help them, Mr. President.
well, Mr. President, I think one of the fundamental problems of real property collection, Mr. President, is the updating of the schedule of market values because it's not being periodically updated, as well as the enactment of the local tax ordinances that is connected to the updating of schedule of market value. So in other words, even though the BLGF provides advice, provides direction, but a lot of because of local autonomy, a lot of the decisions still lie within the mayor as well as the local sanggunian, Mr. President.
Yes, that's why we thought of this bill, Mr. President. Pero as I pointed out the last time, di ba? We want this bill because this will help the local government units improve their revenues through improved RPT collections. But at the same time, we also empower them to avoid so that they can take measures in order to avoid any effect in their RPT collections, Mr. President. So why? Diba the three factors?
Yes, Mr. President.
Sabi natin last time, the LGU can adjust the two of the
Yes,
three.
the assessment level and the
to-
tax rates.
Yes, so that the taxpayer, the real property taxpayer, will not feel the
Yes.
effect of the bill. So
The tax due will remain the same, Mr. President.
Yes, I'm back to my basic question, Mr. President. Then why are we undergoing this exercise, Mr. President, or experiment, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, under the local government code, the LGUs are mandated to revise to conduct general revision, Mr. President. But the fundamental basis for the general revision is the schedule of market values. And under the local government code, and this is an opinion from the BLGF, that the local government can, the minimum requirement for local governments to update their schedule of market value is not more than once every 3 years. So a lot of our local governments do not update their schedule of market values. So, and because of that, the schedule of market values are not realistic anymore compared to the actual market values. And because of that, they don't undertake revision because since they don't update their schedule of market values, there's no point of conducting general revision as well, Mr. President. So a lot of our LGUs got stuck in very ancient market values, Mr. President, and that depresses the local tax collection of the local government units, Mr. President. So in basic terms, Mr. President, the local government units are not updating their schedule of market values, and that's the aim of this bill, Mr. President.
The obligation to undertake a general revision, in what section is that found of the local government code, Mr. President?
219, Mr.
219.
President.
I will read 219. General revision of assessment and property classification. The provincial, city or municipal assessor shall undertake a general revision of real property assessments within 2 years after the effectivity of this code and every 3 years thereafter. So that is the obligation or the duty that we are citing, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, for general revision, Mr. President.
Kaya nga, I want to now understand what is the meaning of general revision of real property assessments. Which of the three factors does this section refer to, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, the general revision of assessment and property classification, in simple terms, this is the activity wherein the local government issues the actual tax declaration already, one by one, Mr. President. That's why the general revision takes time. But the basis of that general revision, Mr. President, are the schedule of market values, as well as the assessment levels and the tax rates that will be enacted through an ordinance, Mr. President. So, in other words, even though the LGUs want to revise, undertake a general revision, they still have to update their schedule of market values because that's one of the most important value in that formula, Mr. President.
So, from our sponsor, do I understand that Section 219 of the local code, the result of this, if this is observed, is the issuance of new updated tax declarations per real property owner?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Yes.
What is found in the tax declaration? We find there the assessment level and we find there the tax rate.
We find there the market value, and then the assessment value, and then they will have the assessment. I think we have slide 6. This is actual, no? Yeah, we can flash on the slide, Mr. President, a sample of a tax declaration,
Yes,
so that will be guided accordingly. slide 16. So we will see here, Mr. President, the most important, of course, aside from the name and the address, will be the classification, whether residential, commercial, industrial, and then you have the area, and then the market value, Mr. President. And then there's also actual use, no? Because sometimes the classification is not in line with the actual use, and the assessors can use the actual use as a basis for their assessment, and then the assessment level, and then you will have now the assessed value. So that is the basis for the tax due, Mr. President.
Yes, so Mr. President, we have been shown images of actual tax declarations of real property, which is the end result of a general revision. Tama, no? Ito po. So, the classification of the real property will be indicated plus the market value and assessment level, and from the assessment level, we can determine the assessed value. But the real property tax due is not found in the tax declaration. Tama? Wala po doon.
No, Mr. President.
Ha? Nandun?
Wait,
wala
Mr.
po.
President. Hold on, Mr. President.
Kasi iba yung ibibigyan kaya ng
Tax due, wala. I think it will be. Yeah, Mr. President, no, Mr. President, it's not found in the tax declaration, Mr. President.
Sige po.
It's normally in practice, the taxpayer will go to the treasurer's office to ask for a computation, but there's a term for that. It's they go to the treasurer's office to ask for a computation of their due.
Yes.
In that computation will contain the tax due. If they have past dues, it will also contain the past dues. Of course, computation of penalties and interest if there are, and that will be the basis for the payment of their taxes for real property.
Assessment.
You have a bigger picture of that. Bigger picture.
So, Mr. President, the market value as of today, under present law, is determined by the Sanggunian.
Sir,
Naman, with that one, in our sample tax declaration, there is a classification of the land area, and then we have a market value. So, is that market value determined by the Sanggunian under present law, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. That is the schedule of market value
Correct.
that is being submitted by the assessor, Mr. President. They have to update that supposedly regularly, Mr. President.
So kasama po yan sa general revision under section 219
Yes, Mr.
as read
President.
by our
Correct.
So
Because in the local government code, if you go to section 212, the preparation for schedule of preparation of schedule of market values, Mr. President. Before any general revision of property assessment is made pursuant to provisions of this title, there shall be prepared a schedule of fair market value by the province, city, municipal assessors, Mr. President. So in other words, the basis for the general revision is the schedule of market values, Mr. President.
correct. Sa ngayon, market value is determined by the Sanggunian of the LGU. Under our bill, alisin natin yung power na yon sa market value.
Yes, Mr. President.
Po.
Yeah.
At
Only the approval, but the preparation will still be undertaken by the local government unit. So the assessor will still collect data,
yeah, but
will update the schedule of market value based on the Philippine valuation standards. So, and after that, they will submit a annual collection, no? Annual target collection of the local government unit, so that the Sanggunians will be guided on how much their target collection for real property for the next year and the years to come, Mr. President.
sino po nag-set ng target?
It's normally a proposal coming from the assessor's office, Mr. President. It's called
Yeah,
tax impact report.
The assessor is the employee of the LGU.
Yes, Mr. President.
Are we retaining that in our bill?
Yes, Mr. President.
And yet, So, these are LGU officials, and yet, pag mag-collaborate na si Assessor and si Sanggunian, yung schedule of market values nila will be subject to approval by the Secretary of the Department of Finance. That's in our bill, tama?
Yes, Mr. President. Insofar as the standards are concerned, Mr. President. So we made it very clear. We made it very clear that the Secretary of Finance will be limited to the compliance to the Philippine valuation standards. Insofar as the value is concerned, we will not have any say on the values, Mr. President.
Let us now imagine a situation where the Secretary of Finance disagrees with the work of the Sanggunian. So what would be the sample reasons to be given by the DOF why he or she is disapproving the LGU ordinance on the schedule of market values? What would be some sample grounds, Mr. President?
But Mr. President, in the Philippine valuation standards, there are methodologies in terms of gathering information, gathering data, computation, consultation. There's a list of standards on how these are being practiced. So, for example, if the local government units will not follow the standard, for example, shortcut lang siya, will get, hindi siya market survey, or the local government units will only rely on one piece of information, then that's a ground or a violation of the standards promulgated by the BLGF. And that can be a ground for the disapproval of the schedule of market value, SMVs.
Ito pong Philippine Valuation Standards, inform ako ng staff ko is isang libro ang kapal nito. So our present assessors are familiar with this
Yes, Mr.
standards
President,
right
because-
now, right? Right
Because,
now.
Mr. President, our assessors are also professionals already. No? They have to get their license under the PRC. In the past, I remember before, they're just mere practitioners, no? And they undergo very basic training. But after the law that governs the profession, they became a professional, Mr. President. The RESA law, Mr. President.
What's the name?
The Real Estate Service Act. 2009, Mr. President.
Real estates, okay.
Yeah, so
kaya-
they're governed. They now have to be licensed in order to be assessors, Mr. President.
So they are familiar with the Philippine Valuation
yes, Mr. President.
Standards. Okay. So if the LGU wants to comply with the PVS in good faith, meron kayo siyang extra expenses na ma-incur?
Mr. President, what I can see the most important aspect will be the assurance that their assessors are licensed, Mr. President. And that means they have to undergo professional training, as well as it's now a course in many of our universities, Mr. President. So it's not enough that you are, let's say, an accountant, a CPA. You have to go through a professional course to be licensed assessor, Mr. President.
Yes, and then you are now an assessor, and then your LGU really wants to comply in good faith with the PVS. So isang libro daw po yun. Baka yung mga survey, market survey,
Correct,
kaya. What would be the additional expenses we can anticipate an LGU to incur, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, I was informed by the BLGF that they have regular trainings for the assessors as well as the entire real property division of the LGUs. So typically in an LGU, like for example in Valenzuela, we have about a head assessor, and then we have about 3 or 4 licensed assessors. The rest are staff and support staff to the assessor. And the BLGF undertakes training of all the real property office personnel, Mr. President. So the cost will be the regular training. If the LGU desires to send their personnel to school to get their license,
Yung mga
that's
steps
additional
po,
school.
yung mga steps, yung mga studies na required, may surveys ba na required? I mean, so yung nasa isang libro po yan, yung Philippine Valuation Standards.
Yeah, it's ang libro siya, Mr. President.
Na dapat mag-comply, di ba?
Yes, Mr.
Hindi.
President. So they're trained to it's part of their curriculum.
Yes. My point, Mr. President, is hindi naman, yes, kung may additional expenses sa munisipyo, for example, would it be by the millions ang additional expenses? Do you really want to comply with the Philippine Valuation Standards? Or meron lang incidental expenses na hindi naman siguro by the millions?
Yeah, the training yun. Yung training.
Tanong mo,
So, Mr.
may mga studies
Yung valuation standard, what can be?
questionnaire.
Yeah, but that's part of the curriculum. That's Well, Mr. President, being professionals, they have regular mandatory continuing education, and typically that's the cost of the government, the LGU, Mr. President. And part of the mandatory continuing education is updating of their know-how on the standards, getting familiar with new concepts, and knowing what the international appraisers and valuation is being conducted abroad, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, kung ganyan lang pala kadali yan, it's all about the qualification of the assessor, then how come LGUs are not complying with our Section 219?
Mr. President, the two things that I during the analysis of this bill. Number one, Mr. President, is the LGUs are not updating their schedule of market values. Their assessors know what to do because now it's required that assessors are licensed assessors. No? But knowing what to do and doing it obviously are different. And most LGUs don't update their schedule of market values because there's no requirement in the local government code to update it regularly, Mr. President. That's number one. And then number two, Mr.
Akala ko
President.
sa 219, Mr. President, every 3 years thereafter.
The revision, Mr. President. The general revision is being conducted every 3 years, but the schedule of market value, there's no strict requirement on how often you update your schedule of market
So
value.
even if they do the general revision, they retain the
Yes,
retain the old
the old
schedule.
one, Mr. President. And to be honest, Mr. President, the practice is normally they touch on the schedule of market values, meaning they increase it or sometimes decrease it, but they don't touch the other variables, such as the assessed value and the tax rates. And of course, when you touch the schedule of market values, it becomes political no? Because people see the actual values. But in reality, they can lower down the assessed value and the tax rates so that the tax due will be the same. So most LGUs are hesitant in terms of touching the schedule of market values because that's what people see and understand.
Hindi po ba mas political is the real property tax due? Kasi yun talaga.
Yun talaga,
Yun ang money out eh. Pero actually, akala ko ba one of the reasons is asset ito. Binibigyan namin ng tunay na value yung asset mo. Hindi ka ba maging happy no na tumaas yung asset mo? At saka, in our last interpellation, akala ko ba one of the purposes din dito is para kung ma-expropriate yung property mo, at least reflected yung real value ng property mo.
Actually,
Mr. President. So, is it really that politically sensitive yung schedule of market values o yung real property tax due ang mas politically sensitive?
From my experience, Mr. President, ang taxpayer at the local level, and I'm sure Senator JV and Senator Tolentino will know this, dual personality. Magtitipid sila sa pagbabayad ng amilyar, pero paghihiram sila sa bangko, yung malaking valuation ang gagamitin nila so that they can get a bigger loan. It's a typical scenario in the local government unit, Mr. President.
Okay. Takot lang sila sa schedule of market values because sa mind nila yung flowchart, this will now lead to a higher real property tax due.
Correct. That's why banks,
But,
typically banks, Mr. President, they don't use tax declaration or the schedule of market values because they know it's undervalued
Yes,
at the local level. Normally, they require professional appraisers to appraise the property, Mr. President.
Yeah, is it one of the objectives of this bill that given a piece of property, when it is appraised by an independent property appraiser, the amount that he or she will come up with should look like the amount in the schedule?
More or
of
less,
values?
Mr.
That's
President.
the idea.
Because in our hearing, Mr. President, and consultative meeting that we conducted, the appraisers also use the Philippine valuation standards. Because the Philippine valuation standards is based on the international valuation standards that all appraisers follow. So meaning if you engage a local appraiser here and they appraise your property, you can use that appraisal report and borrow from an international bank. And they will recognize that because of the international valuation standard, Mr. President. So it's a global practice, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, itong bill na ito will allow LGUs to implement countermeasures so that the real property tax due will not really increase, and because that is very politically sensitive. But then if the schedule of market values at the local level is also sensitive, and yet that schedule is not used in the determination of the capital gains tax in case of transactions over that piece of land. Ibang value ang ano eh.
Correct,
Oh,
Mr.
ibang
President.
capital gains tax, ano pa ba?
Correct,
Documentary
Mr.
stamp tax siguro, iba pa. Even sa 2% for loan application sa banko, ibang
Yes, Mr.
document and value ang gagamitin. then why are we doing this, involving forcing local government units to do a politically sensitive act, and yet at the same time empower them to lessen the impact of that politically sensitive act, Mr. President?
That's why, Mr. President, we're changing the paradigm. We are depoliticizing the updating of schedule of market values, and instead transferring the political aspect to the assessment levels and the tax rates. And it will yield the same, Mr. President. But we're just changing the paradigm on how local governments compute tax due. At the end of the day, you're absolutely correct. At the end of the day, they should look at the tax due. And there are three levers or three variables that they can use in order to reach the same tax due. And then we're just changing that paradigm, Mr. President. And I demonstrated in the past, we ran simulations, for example, in Valenzuela, that we can achieve the same tax due as long as you lower down the assessment levels and the tax rates.
The sponsors used City of Valenzuela as an example. So in the City of Valenzuela, revised na po yung schedule of market values?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President.
And you've used the Philippine valuation standards?
Yes, Mr. President.
So if we hire an independent third-party property appraiser to appraise a value of land in Valenzuela, yung number na he or she will come up with, ibangga natin sa tax deck? They will
More
be,
or less, Mr.
they will
President.
they will be in the same vicinity?
More or less, Mr. President. Plus or minus
Yeah, plus
maybe
or
10%,
minus.
Mr. President.
Yes, yes.
But more or less, more or less.
So congratulations to the city of Valenzuela. And then there was no political upheaval in
No,
city of
meron rin, Mr. President. Meron rin, Mr. President. It was a long process. In fact, I remember when I was a mayor, I took out the discounts because in the local government code you can offer discounts, but the discounts what? 20%? Yeah, 20% for prompt payment. I removed that, Mr. President, because I told them it's better to remove that and get 20% rather than increase the schedule of market value. But that took us almost, maybe 1 or 2 years to explain to our constituents. It's really very difficult, and that's why we are changing the paradigm by depoliticizing the schedule of market values. But we will still empower the local government units the capability to lower down the other variables, Mr. President.
Tama-tama, Mr. President, January pa ngayon. Ngayon, kung magbayad yata ngayon, may discount, di ba?
Oo. So, Valenzuela, wala pa, Mr.
Karamihan ng LGUs, opo, may discount pagka. So, yung mga nakikinig sa atin na nalimutan na
In
may
most LGUs,
RPT.
yeah, in most LGUs, may advance payment discount of 20%. 20%.
And then, ulitin ko po, we have the support of the local government units expressed through their associations.
Yes, Mr. President,
Opo, nabanggit nyo na po yan, pero di ba parang secretary lang pumunta or representative?
Yeah, but we requested the leadership to issue a letter, Mr. President.
So we have it na?
Yeah, we have it already, Mr. President.
All the ano bang tawag mo doon?
The ULAP, Mr.
The
President.
associations, not only ULAP, Mr. President, kasi ULAP would be
The umbrella
ng
organization.
lahat na yan but
Yeah.
you have the League of Governors, League of Cities, League of Municipalities, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Meron po lahat yon?
Not individually, Mr. President. We tapped ULAP being the umbrella organization of all local government units. And their constituents are the local government units, Mr. President. So we tapped ULAP. But we also invited the other components, local government components to attend. And I didn't hear any opposition or objection to the proposed measure, Mr. President. The only recommendation that they made is to make it, the general revision, make it longer, give them enough time, and also support in terms of budget and digitalization, Mr. President, which we incorporated in the bill.
Meron pong part of the records naman of the committee na yung communication ng ULAP.
Yes, Mr. President.
Signed by who, Mr. President?
Mr. President, this one is signed by the Executive Director, Mr. President, dated October 17, 2023.
Sino po yun?
Ms. Eileen Leicano, Mr. President.
But the ED is not a local chief executive, no, Mr. President?
No, Mr. President. But I'm sure this has the imprimatur and the permission of their leadership, Mr. President.
Is there a resolution of the board, Mr. President?
Let me get our notes, Mr. President, and to
Sige
reflect
po.
it over in the records, Mr. President.
Sige, while you're looking at the notes, Mr. President, can I ask another question, Mr. President? So, Mr. President, another topic. Is there an international valuation standard, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
So, meron din Philippine valuation standard. So, related ba yung dalawa?
Yes, Mr. President.
So, we derived the PVS from the IVS?
Yes, Mr. President.
And which body issued the IVS?
It's a International Valuation Standards Council.
Do we know who are the personalities behind this council? Kasi, in effect, yung issuances nila will find their way to our LGUs through this bill. International valuation standards, Philippine valuation standards, then local ordinance.
Yes, Mr.
Sino
President.
po sila? Sino to mga to na pinagtitiwalaan po natin? Is this a treaty? Are we a member of this council because of a treaty?
No, it's not a treaty, Mr. President, but we're a member of, let me get the exact information, Mr. President.
Bureau of Local Government Finance and Asian Development
But we're, but give me the, dapat give me the, yung write-up. Ano kayo ginawa?
Makes sense naman.
I'll get the exact write-up, Mr. President.
Ano sagot yan?
In the description ng IPS. Okay, but give me the description. Give me the description. Yan, meron to.
And then after this, take that power na lang namin.
But Mr. President, the International Valuation Standards Council, the IVSC, facilitates the collaboration and cooperation among its member organizations who are valuation service providers, financial services, businesses, regulators, international bodies, and academic institutions. The IVSC consists of more than 100 member organizations from around the world and is supported by numerous sponsors who are leaders in the valuation field. And the Bureau of Local Government Finance is a member and was accepted in March 2018 as an institutional member of the International Valuation Standards Council.
Okay, that's good, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
It's a bureau of our government, Mr. President, which is a member. And how was this council put up, Mr. President? By treaty, or are we a founding member, or we just joined the council, Mr. President?
We're not, we're an institutional member, Mr. President.
Yes, we are institutional member. So were we already a member at the founding of this group, Mr. President? We joined it, or did we join it when it was already an existing group, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. We joined it when it's already an existing group, Mr.
Do
President.
we have the basic background of the group? Who put up this group, Mr. President?
Here, Mr. President. The International Valuation Standards, well, let me describe first the International Valuation Standards. The International Valuation Standards is the overarching standards adopted, followed by members of the International Valuation Standards Council. The International Valuation Standards Council is an independent global standard setter for the valuation profession. The IVSC has more than 200 member organizations operating in 137 countries worldwide. The objective of the IVS is to increase the confidence and trust of users of valuation services by establishing transparent and consistent valuation practices, Mr. President.
So may we get the, let's say, prominent members or even member states of the IVSC, Mr. President? Mostly Western ba? Western societies, the US and Europe, ganun po ba?
Let me get the exact membership, Mr. President, the most prominent one.
Then my next question would be, who are the prominent non-members, Mr. President? Para makita natin yung point of view. Ano yung point of view?
Just give me the prominent non-members,
Also
Mr. President.
members and non-members also, Mr. President. Just to find out, Mr. President, if the organization has a certain bias, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President,
or,
we're just getting the exact
way of looking at things, Mr. President.
Here. For example, Mr. President, I'm just going to name a few here. In Singapore, the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore, the Singapore Economic Development Board,
Apo.
The International Finance Corporation or World Bank, International Association of Assessing Officers. These are international members.
Are there Chinese entities members, Russian, Mr. President?
Uzbekistan, Mr. President, Association of Appraisal Organization of Uzbekistan.
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 Yes, sir.
So, Mr. President, some more members. I'm just going through the more prominent ones, Mr. President.
So, yes, Mr. President, so hindi pala countries ang members nito? Ano pala?
Organizations. Mr.
Organizations pala.
President.
Opo,
Well,
opo.
some of them are country government agencies,
Yes,
Mr.
opo,
President. So, most of them, actually. So, I'm just going
Sige
through
po.
the most prominent, Mr. President.
So the international valuation standards, as far as we know, are already being observed in how many state jurisdictions? Siguro countries, pwede naman siguro pag-usapan. Countries po, no? Kung saan sila applicable.
137 countries worldwide, Mr. President.
Observe the international valuation
Yeah.
standards. So, lagay na lang natin sa mga close to 55, kasi 193 yata ang United Nations. So, mga 56 ang countries po ang hindi nag-observe po nito.
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, I went through it, the list. I don't see China in the list, Mr. President. No?
So, are we counting the Philippines already as one of the countries observing it now, right now? Even without this law, are we considered as
Yes, Mr. President.
already observing
Yes,
it?
Mr. President.
Sige po, Mr. President, matagal na rin kasi itong pending, so one last.
Yeah, Mr. President, before we continue, let me just put on record the letter of the ULAP signed by their Executive Director, Eileen Laicano, dated October 17, 2023. And let me just put on record their statement of support. The Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines, ULAP, as the umbrella organization representing all leagues of local government units and locally elected officials in the country, supports the enactment of a Real Property Valuation and Assessment Reform Act to enhance the revenue-generating capabilities of local governments and their ability to mobilize resources in order to meet their diverse fiscal requirements. And then it goes through some of the recommendations to improve the bill, Mr. President. And we will get the corresponding resolution that triggered this letter, Mr. President, and share it to the good minority leader.
Sige po, thank you. Sige, but this one, my next point is important as far as I'm concerned, Mr. President. What powers are we giving the Secretary of Finance, Mr. President, under our bill?
But let me teka nga yung exact. I'm just getting the exact section. In section 15, Mr. President, the Secretary of Finance can approve or disapprove the SMVs on the basis of its compliance to the Philippine valuation standards, Mr. President.
So, this Secretary of Finance expected to review all those LGU ordinances? Mga more or less, how many are we expecting him to review, Mr. President?
But Mr. President, in the bill, he's not expected to review the ordinance, but only the schedule of market values. And there are 200... What's the exact? Ano ba yung schedule of cover? Ilan nga? Mr. President, there are 228 LGUs. 228 LGUs. That's
200 lang?
81 provinces and 147 cities, because the municipalities is under the provinces, Mr. President. So, in other words, the Secretary will only have to review the schedule of market values of 228 LGUs, Mr. President.
How many provinces, Mr. President?
81 provinces
81 lang pala.
and 147 cities.
So, this schedule of market values are are found in ordinances. Tama? Ordinances. Assessor updates the schedule market values, convinces the Sangguniang to pass, it's either the provincial board or the city council to pass this, to recognize it in an ordinance.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ordinance is now submitted to the Secretary of Finance.
No, Mr. President. So what happens is the schedule of market values will be submitted by the assessor to the BLGF to review whether they comply with the standards. And BLGF will submit that to the DOF Secretary to approve or disapprove based on the standards. But when they return it to the local government units, it's up to the local government units to enact an ordinance using that schedule of market values, Mr. President.
Yes, but the local government unit cannot approve a schedule of market values not approved by the Secretary of the DOF. Tama? Di ba? Assessor, BLGF, Secretary of the DOF, approve. Then, saka po ipa-adapt sa LGU. Tama po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Ganun po ang mangyayari. Okay, sige po. So they cannot, yes, the flow chart is changed in the sense that the assessor acts as if it is under now the BLGF, Mr. President. No, but we have established earlier that the assessor is an employee of the LGU. Tama po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President. Only on insofar as supervision, Mr. President.
Hindi, pero the BLGF, the assessor is going to be required by this law to submit it to the BLGF. Will there be a sanction kung ma-skip niya ito? Out of habit, diniretso niya sa council?
Yes, Mr. President. Well, the current practice, Mr. President, they also submit to the BLGF, Mr.
Pero
President.
not awaiting any,
No,
not
Mr. President. Only
awaiting
for
any
comments.
action. Oh.
Typically, it's for comments, Mr. President.
Magbabago ang flowchart, Mr. President, actually. Assessor, you should not give it to the LGU, to the Sangguniang, give it to BLGF. Diba? Await its return after proper approval. So, does our bill provide a sanction for the assessor if out of habit, diniretso pa po niya sa Sangguniang?
Yes, Mr. President, we provided a sanction and a penalty clause here, Mr. President. But I have a slide on the flow chart, Mr. President, if the good minority leader would want to see it. We'll flash it on slide 49. Huh? Yeah, so Mr. President, so the local assessor will prepare the SMVs, the scheduled market values, and submit it to the regional office, BLGF regional office, and then the regional office will review it and then submits it to the executive director, and the executive director now will submit it to the Secretary of Finance, and once approved, it will be published in the official gazette, and that will take effect, Mr. President. So that's the flow chart, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, given the flowchart now on the screen, there is no Sangguniang action necessary, Mr. President?
For the SMVs, Mr. President.
Yes, wala na.
But in the ordinance, when they enact what they call the local revenue code, they will put the schedule of market values there, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, but basta ang schedule of market values approved by the Secretary of the DOF. Yun yan. That's
Yes,
it.
Mr. President.
Once approved, then it's approved.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
President. Effective.
And then the default rule in our bill is if no action, then after 30 days, deemed approved.
Yes, Mr. President.
Oh, sige. So, and why are we putting that as the default result, Mr. President? Kung 228 LGUs lang naman ang
Yeah, that's true.
aaralin ng DOF, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, we wanted...
Kasi, Mr. President, hiningi ito ng power ng Secretary of the DOF and then meron tayong provision na if no action. So, ibig sabihin, may senaryo tayo, hindi niya kaya yung trabaho hiningi niya, Mr.
But actually,
President.
Mr. President, it's only 228, so it's not...
Mr. President.
and this is done every 3 years, Mr. President. So, but we just put it there, Mr. President, so that the time element will be fulfilled, Mr. President. So there will be no delay, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, but it doesn't look good, no, Mr. President. From the DOF comes a radical new idea, and yet meron tayong default rule doon
Yes,
na
Mr. President.
if we cannot act on it, deemed approved. Hiningi mo pa, ginulo mo pa yung sistema.
Yeah, Mr. President. So we just placed it there, Mr. President, so that it's really an anti-red tape concept, Mr. President, the deem approved concept.
So yun pala, at least naklaro po natin. And then with the schedule of market values na what is critical is the approval of the Secretary of the DOF. Ito ang gagamitin ngayon ng concerned LGUs for their determination of assessment levels
Yes,
plus
correct.
the tax rates.
Correct.
Ganun po yun.
And the eventual tax due, Mr. President. So that is the process, Mr. President.
But while right now, yung schedule of market values is in an ordinance by the LGU, issued by the LGU. Tama po?
Yeah, the current practice, yes. Yes, Mr. President. For purposes of enacting a revenue code, a local revenue code.
Yeah, but what is the purpose of returning the SMB to the local government units? For the same purpose?
Yes,
yeah?
for the same purpose, correct.
So
You're correct.
tinanggalan talaga natin ng power, Mr. President. Ang concern ko dito yung effects sa local autonomy, Mr. President. So, for as long as walang approve si Secretary of DF na SMB, hindi makakilo si local sanggunian.
Well, Mr. President, that's why we also put that 30-day deem approved rule.
Hindi, pwede niya pang ibalik, sir, eh. Before 30 days, ibalik niya, eh. Tapos,
Yes, Mr. President.
then balik ulit sa kanya, ibalik niya ulit. So, for as long as walang approve ni DOF, hostage po niya yung sistema sa local government.
If we will return it,
Theoretically, yes, sir. We have
Theoretically, yes.
We have
If
to
you-
entertain all possible
yes, Mr.
scenarios,
President.
Mr. President.
You're correct. If he keeps on returning it, meaning keeps on bringing it back to the LGU, theoretically, yes, Mr. President.
Yes, and since the assessor is not there, the DOF's employee, wala siyang he cannot even change the assessor, tama?
No, Mr. President,
Yes,
because
cannot.
that's a local government employee, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. President. Meron bang model ito sa ibang bansa, Mr. President? Our flowchart, our system?
I understand, Mr. President, different jurisdictions will have different way of assessing their real property, Mr. President. So I'll get back to you on that one, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, ito na lang isa pang bigay concern yata ito ng mga appraisers. Basahin ko po just two paragraphs
Mr.
and I'll get the reaction of our sponsor.
Yes, Mr. President.
The drastic adjustment of the SMV may result in a significant increase in the real property tax due. For example, the SMV of a particular LGU was last updated in 2010. Under this bill, the SMV will be adjusted to its current value. 2023 pa po itong ginamit niya na year. Consequently, there would be an exponential increase in the RPT due because of the sudden adjustment of the SMV. Ito po yung insight niya na gusto ko po ng reaction. Homeowners and property developers fear that this will lead to default in home loan payments and forfeiture of properties.
Actually, that was raised by Senator Hontiveros during her interpellation. Well, Mr. President, the local government units should also be alert and proactive to lower down the assessment levels and the tax rates. Definitely, the schedule of market values will increase the property values because it will now be in line with reality. However, the local government units can lower down the assessment level and the tax rate so that it will yield to the same tax due. However, Mr. President, some of our colleagues also voiced out the same concern. So at the proper time, we might introduce some safeguards, Mr. President, to prevent abrupt changes, Mr. President.
Yes, well, Mr. President, siguro I'll just reiterate my concern on the power of the Secretary of the DOF. It might amount to control and no longer just supervision by the. Actually, I think the official was supervision over LGUs would be the President, Mr. President. So alter ego siguro niya mga secretary.
Yes,
He
Mr.
can
President,
give
correct.
some power to them. Pero this may amount already to control, Mr. President, kasi ang definition kasi ng supervision, you make sure that those under you perform in accordance with law or
Yes.
within law. Ang power naman ng control is you can replace your judgment for the judgment of those under you. Ang nangyari ngayon dito, the LGU, the Sanggunian, cannot entertain a general revision, kasi general revision na of the general revision of real property assessments include assessment levels and tax rates. They cannot do that unless there is DOF approved schedule of market value. So sa flow chart or sa steps required, we might even be interfering with the concept of local autonomy, Mr. President, because merong step doon na may iba ang may control si Secretary of Finance. So that is my greatest worry, Mr. President, and this is actually reflected in the number of sections in the local government code which are proposed to be repealed, Mr. President.
But, Mr.
If I'm not mistaken, marami-rami po ito.
Yeah. Mr. President, we admittedly, some of the provisions there are not, some of the provisions in the repealing section needs to be reviewed, and admittedly that some of the items in the local government code should not be repealed. So we are cleaning that up, Mr. President, making sure that we preserve the powers of the local government units and only confine the powers of the Secretary of Finance limited to the role of approving and disapproving based on the standards that the local governments follow. So we're cleaning up the repealing clauses, Mr. President.
So can this representation just be also informed, Mr. President, on the direction? Not less than 9 sections yung
Yes,
nabasa
I
ko.
can see that.
Sections pa yun, may mga subsections
Yeah,
pa po.
actually, the good minority leader already forewarned me about the repealing clauses, and then when we reviewed it, we saw that some provisions in the local government code should not be repealed and preserved. No? So admittedly, we have to amend that.
Kasi sa akin parang indication yun, ang laki ng impact niya on local autonomy kung ganun kadami yung sa po yung maapektuhan. At kailangan, hindi lang ito yung modify accordingly, but to be repealed. So I hope that we undertake this review. But at any rate, Mr. President, I think it's time for me to terminate my interpellation kasi we started this around mga 2 years ago ba?
Almost. Well, the bill itself is matagal na.
Hindi naman.
This is 13th Congress.
I'm just exaggerating, Mr. President, just to lighten the moment, Mr. President. I don't want to compare this with yung baka matawag dito walang kamatayang RP Bara, no, Mr. President.
But Mr. President, just to close, we will definitely take the recommendation of our good minority leader to look at the role of the Secretary of Finance and if there will be a violation of the principle of control versus supervision. And we are open to receiving suggestions and amendments from our good minority leader, being one of the experts of the local government code.
Plus protection of local autonomy, Mr.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank our sponsor for his patience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, to our good minority leader.
Well, technically, hanggang last year pa to, last year pa.
We are the meticulous house, Mr. President.
Yes, absolutely. And we welcome debate and amendments and improvements of the bill.
Yes, Mr. President, we were called the slower house, but I'm proud of that because we do our job and really scrutinize each measure that passes
Absolutely.
this plenary.
Absolutely.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2386. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2492 under Committee Report number 172. This is the bill on the Philippine Maritime Zones Act.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this bill is that we are in the period of interpellation. With the consent of the body, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Francis Tolentino, and to continue this interpellation, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. I
Yes,
move that
our
they be
distinguished
recognized.
colleague, Senator Francis Tolentino, Chairman of the Committee on Justice, and the Chairman of the Subcommittee, or rather the Special Committee on Maritime Zones, and also to interpolate a distinguished colleague from Nueva Ecija, Camarines Norte, and adopted son of Mindanao, Senator Padilla is recognized.
Maraming salamat po, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo at sa ating pong pinunong mayorya. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Bismillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Isang pagbati po ng kapayapaan sa aking ginagalang at akin pong hinahangaang senador, Senator Francis Tolentino.
Magandang hapon po, Mr. President.
Mahal na Pangulo,
Magandang gabi na pala.
ako po ay nasa pulpito ngayon sapagkat ang akin pong paghanga sa pagmamahal ng taong ito at ang kanyang very passionate na pakikipaglaban para sa West Philippine Sea ay nagkaroon po kami ng mahabang talakayan patungkol po sa naging masasabi ko pong patutsadahan ni Senator Tolentino at ni Senator Bato patungkol po sa usapin ng Sabah. Naitanong po sa interpellation ng ating mahal na Senador Senator Bato de la Rosa sa ating pong ginagalang at hinahangaan na Senador Tol Tolentino, nagbigay po siya ng kasagutan sa katanungan na napakalalim po nito para sa aming mga Muslim. Batid naman po natin na ang ating mahal na Ginoong Pangulo ay tinatawag naming amain na ang Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Ang ating pong mahal na Pangulo, Senator Zubiri, ay alam ko po ang inyong pagmamahal sa Bangsamoro ay natumbasan sa akin pong pakikipag-usap kay Senator Tolentino. Napakalalim po ng kanyang pakikipaglaban para sa Sabah. Ito pong katanungan ko ngayon sa pulpito ay may kinalaman po ito sa Sabah. Sapagkat dito po sa bill na isinusulong ay nagkakaroon po ng maraming katanungan sapagkat noong pong unang gumawa ng batas patungkol dito, ito po ay panahon pa noong 1968 pa ito. Ito po ay nagkaroon muli, inamendahan noong 2008, July. Ito po yung Republic Act number 9522. Ang katanungan po naming malaki ng kamusliman ay doon po sa unang batas na andoon yung patungkol sa ating claim, sovereignty, claim sa Sabah. Pero dito po sa 9522, naging tahimik po ang batas na ito doon sa claim natin. Ang gusto ko pong unang itanong sa ating hinahangaan at talaga pong ang kanyang pagmamahal sa Bangsamoro nung pinakitaan po ko ng mga ebidensya niya talaga. Buong bag ang ebidensya niya ng kanyang pagmamahal sa ating claim sa Sabah. Ngayon, ang tanong ko po sa ating mahal na Senador Tol Tolentino, dito po ba sa panibagong batas na ating isasagawa, ang claim po ba natin sa Sabah ay nandyan pa rin? Hindi po ba nawawala? Hindi po ba nababaliwala dito sa bagong batas na ito ang claim natin sa Sabah?
Opo, Mr. President, mahal na Pangulo, sa katanungan po ng ating ginagalang na Senador Padilla, hindi po natin inaalis ang ating pagkilala, ang ating pag-aangkin sa teritoryo ng Sabah, sa North Borneo, kung saan ang Pilipinas, sa ilalim ng batas na nabanggit ng Ginoong Senador Padilla, ay nakasaad doon sa Republic Act 5446, Section 2, na aking babasahin sa Ingles, na valid pa hanggang ngayon. Ito po yung binanggit niya kaninang batas na aprobahan noong September 18, 1968. Section 2 states, and I quote, "The definition of the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippine archipelago as provided for in this act is without prejudice to the delineation of the baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah, situated in North Borneo, over which the Republic of the Philippines has acquired dominion and sovereignty." Mahal na Pangulo, ito pong section 2 ito ay hindi na bago nung sinundang batas noong pong March 10, 2009, yung Republic Act 9522, kung saan nakasaad yung baselines ng Pilipinas. Dahil ito po, Mr. President, ay sang-ayon doon sa 1987 Constitution. Nakalagay po dito, babasahin ko yung unang paragraph. "The national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction." Maliwanag po, Mr. President, hindi ho natin inaabandon na yan. Dangan nga lamang, Mr. President, itong usapin po sa maritime zone at tungkol po doon sa United Nations Law of the Sea ay patungkol po sa dagat. Patungkol po sa dagat na nagsisimula. At kukunin ko po, Mr. President, ang aking meron po akong taglay na mapa rito, Mr. President. At,
Ano siya? Analog, hindi digital. Analog. Old school.
kasi po, pinag-usapan 1968. Noong 1968, wala pa ho talaga ang gusto ko po makita ito, Mr.
Yan.
President. At makikita naman ng ginagalang nating Ginoo buhat sa Nueva Ecija. Ito po yung ating baseline sa ngayon. So masasabi natin, Mr. President, na ito po yung ating baseline. At yung pag tinukoy po natin yung Maritime Zone Act, ito po ay palabas doon sa baseline. Sangayon po sa United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. Palabas po ito. Ibig sabihin po, umaatras po siya, umaabante po siya, papunta sa labas. Magsisimula po sa 12 nautical miles, sumunod po yung 12 nautical miles na territorial sea, hanggang palabas na po dun sa 200 nautical miles na exclusive economic zone. So ibig sabihin po, ang usapin po ng Sabah ay hindi kasama sa baselines na ito dahil ito po yung archipelagic baselines. At nakalagay po doon sa, Mr. President, doon sa nabanggit kanina na 1968 na batas, ay without prejudice to the delineation of the baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah. So yung Sabah po, magkakaroon din ng sariling baselines na hanggang sa ngayon, wala pa po tayo. Yung settlement po ng territory ng Sabah ay patungkol po sa lupa, teritoryo po ng lupa, landmass. Ang usapin po natin dito ay patungkol sa atin pong dagat, karagatan, waters, yung palabas po galing sa ating archipelagic baseline. Subalit, sinisigurado ko po sa ginagalang na kasamahan natin sa Nueva Ecija, dito po sa Section 2 ng ating panukalang batas, na gusto ko rin basahin, kung yung mamarapatin, Section 2, the maritime zones of the Philippines comprise the internal waters, ito po yung tinuro ko kanina, ito yung mga ilog, yung mga bay, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, ito na yung sinasabi ko, and continental shelf. All territories of the Philippines shall generate their respective maritime zones in accordance with international law. So hindi po ito salungat doon sa ating Sabah claim dahil po yung Sabah, maliit po itong mapang ito, nandito po sa baba, ay magkakaroon po yan ng sarili niyang baseline at magkakaroon din po yan ng kanyang sariling territorial sea, contiguous zone, at exclusive economic zone.
Professor Tolentino.
Hindi po ito...
My dear colleague, pwede ba mapalagay din sa screen? Kasi hindi ko na makita dito, medyo malayo. Malit. Okay lang. Kung wala pong picture, okay lang.
Ayan. Pwede naman pong i-adjust pataas. Ayan. Okay. Ayan. So, ayan. Pwede pala yun eh. So, ito po yung ating archipelagic baseline. Ito nakapaligid na ito. Konti lang po tayo. Halos 22 bansa lang po sa buong mundo ang merong ganitong hugis at merong ganitong claim sa archipelagic baseline. So, lahat po, ito pong nasa baba, sinasabi ko po, yung usapin sa Sabah, sa North Borneo, ay hindi po bahagi ng law of the sea. Iba pong aspeto po yan ng international law. Subalit, itong batas po natin na pinapanukala, bagamat hindi na nabanggit ang Sabah, ito po ay sang-ayon sa ating saligang batas at nakalagay po sa saligang batas all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. So ibig sabihin po, wala po tayong inaabandona, wala po tayong iniiwan na lugar na pag-aari ng Pilipinas at yun lamang pong usapin yon ay iba pong uri ng international law, ang ibang uri ng rehimen batas ang tatalakay po doon at hindi po dito sa maritime zone. Dahil ito pong maritime zone po ay patungkol lang po doon sa ating main archipelago, Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. So magkakaroon po ng sariling maritime zone in the future, yung North Borneo, yung Sabah, at ito po ay isang separate na batas, mahal na Pangulo.
Ginoong Pangulo, malinaw po ba na dito sa bill na ito, kailangan maging malinaw po tayo, mahal na Pangulo, sapagkat doon po sa RA 9522, medyo naging tahimik na po kasi ang batas natin patungkol po sa Sabah. Hindi naman po ito ibig sabihin kasi ang isang batas kailangan mo muna talagang i-repeal yan o amendahan. Hindi naman po siya ni-repeal, hindi naman po siya na-amendahan, pero naging tahimik siya. Mahirap naman po siguro, mahal na Pangulo, kung magkakaroon tayo uli ng isa pang batas ngayon na magiging tahimik muli. Siguro kailangan ipaalala na natin uli sa sambayan ng Pilipino na yung ating claim sa Sabah. At ang hinihiling po natin na pagkatapos mong ipaliwanag ng napakaliwanag ng ating ginagalang na senador, ay maisama po sa panukalang batas niya ang aming amendment na sinasabi na ibabalik natin kung ano po yung nandoon sa 1968 na law, na yun po yung patungkol doon sa Sabah dahil napakahirap pong namnamin na makakaroon uli ng batas patungkol dito. Siyempre po, ito ay may sovereignty. Pinag-uusapan natin yung sovereignty dito, maging ito man ay sa tubig o lupa. Nandito mismo sa papel na yan, ang pinag-uusapan, sovereignty. Maging maritime man itong usapin nito o anumang usapin nito, sovereignty pa rin ito. At ang claim po natin sa Sabah ay sovereignty. Kaya hinihiling po natin sa atin pong kanina pinakitaan ako talaga, mahal na Pangulo, pinakitaan ako ng ibang klase ang research ni Senator Tolentino sa Sabah. At napakaganda po ng kanyang mga mungkahi. At naniniwala po ako na ipaglalaban niya ang Sabah. At naniniwala din po ako na tatanggapin ng ating, sa pagdating po ng tamang pagdinig patungkol sa amendment, ay pakinggan niya po at tatanggapin po niya ang aming amendment.
Mahal na Pangulo, tama po ang binabanggit ng ating mahal na kasama na sa Nueva Ecija na sa Section 2 nga, nabanggit ko kanina, noong Republic Act 5446, mention was made of without prejudice to the delineation of baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah. Meaning to say, noong 1968, ito po ay, alam niyo po, noong 1968, nagkaroon din po ng debate rito at pinakita ko po kay kagalang-galang na Senador Padilla, si Senator Sumulong at si Senator Jovito Salonga ay nagbigkas patungkol dito. Hawak-hawak ko po yung yung records po nila. So binanggit po rito sa noong 1968 yung Sabah. Subalit dito po sa sinabi ng ating minamahal na kasama na tumahimik doon sa March 2009 na batas, yung Republic Act 9522, tama po siya na hindi nilagay yung pangalan ng Sabah. Subalit doon sa Section 3, nakalagay po doon, this act affirms that the Republic of the Philippines has dominion, sovereignty, and jurisdiction all over portions of the national territory as defined in the Constitution and by provisions of applicable laws. So, ibig sabihin po, dito po sa Section 3, pasok din po yung Sabah. Pasok din po yung Sabah. Dangan nga lang, hindi na isama doon sa baseline kasi yung baseline po ay mangangailangan po ng World Geodetic System citation. The latitude, longitude, as well as the distance to the next base point will have to be cited. So, for instance, ito pong Ditolong Point, 117 degrees 6, 14.79 latitude, longitude of 122 degrees, 31.4, etc., etc. Hindi po sinama dito dahil wala po tayong ganoong sukat na ginawa ang NAMRIA. Subalit, hindi natin inaabandona yung ating claim sa Sabah dahil nakalagay nga po doon sa Section 3. So all-encompassing po yung Section 3. Sa katunayan po, nung binalangkas po yung batas na yon, ay katulong din yung dating Solicitor General para si dating Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza para siguraduhin na kasama po lahat yan. Dito naman po sa bagong batas na ating pong tinatalakay ngayon, yung definition po ng baselines ay sang-ayon sa ating saligang batas at nabanggit ko kanina yung sa Article 1, National Territory, kasama rin po yung territories natin over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. Ang ibig ko pong sabihin, Mr. President, sa lahat po ng ito, yung pagbabago ng batas, yung 1968 na wala pang UNCLOS, yung 9 Republic Act 9522 na meron ng UNCLOS at meron na tayong ibang saligang batas, lahat pong ito ay hindi nag-aabandona ng ating claim sa Borneo dahil nandun po yung sa ating saligang batas. At sangayon din po ito, Mr. President, sa umiiral na geopolitical diplomatic conditions kung saan ang Pilipinas ay naging bahagi ng ASEAN. Noong una, bahagi po tayo ng Southeast Asian Treaty Organization o SIATO. Ngayon, naging bahagi tayo ng ASEAN. Meron po tayo mga kasunduan at ito pwede ko nang banggitin sangayon sa mga dokumento ng Department of Foreign Affairs sa Malaysia at mga karatig na bansa na yung pagkilala natin sa Sabah ay hindi natin iniiwan yung ating historical and legal right. Subalit meron pong mga gawain ngayon ang ating executive branch na kinikilala rin ng legislatura kung saan merong meron pong mga bagay na patungkol sa bilateral relations natin sa Malaysia na mas malawak ang sinasaklaw at merong mga hawak-hawak ko po rito isang memorandum circular nung panahon po ni Presidente Gloria Macapagal Arroyo na merong guidelines na sinunod ang pamahalaan lalong-lalo na sa pagbabanggit ng Sabah at ganoon din po yung latest na dokumentong hawak ko which I showed to the good gentleman that even the Department of Foreign Affairs as of December 7, 2023, ilang buwan pa lang, ilang linggo pa lang nakakalipas, ay nagsasabi na dapat daw po yung ating saligang batas ay manaig. Subalit, ayaw nilang gamitin yung diretsuhang lingwahe na hinihiling ng ating kasamang Senador Padilla na sa palagay ko po ay tama. Tama pong banggitin natin, i-claim na to be consistent that Sabah is part of our territory. However, due to our evolving diplomatic and geopolitical ties with our neighboring countries, specifically, banggitin ko na rin ang Malaysia, ay meron pong mga lingwahe na ayaw nilang ipalagay ng diretso. And I understand the sentiment of the good gentleman that and that this should be reiterated. But just the same, the Maritime Zones Law is anchored on UNCLOS. And UNCLOS refers to the seas, the utilization of resources, sovereignty, sovereign rights, freedom of navigation. And the starting point would always be the archipelagic baselines. Ito nga pong tinuturo ko kanina. So, hindi po papasok sa archipelagic baseline natin ang Sabah. Dahil ang Sabah po ay nandun sa labas noong Philippine Archipelago na kinikilala natin at ng ibang bansa, yung Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Ang sinasabi po sa mga dating sa mga umiiral na batas pa natin, yung nabanggit ko kanina, ang Sabah po ay magkakaroon ng sariling archipelagic baseline at balang araw magkakaroon ng sariling maritime zone law. Magkakaroon ng sariling territorial sea, contiguous zone at ng exclusive economic zone. Tama po yung kahilingan ni Senator Padilla na magbanggit ng isang linya na hindi natin inaabandona ang ating pagkilala sa Sabah. Tama po yun. At sa period of amendment, kung ano man po ang magiging lingwahe po nito, mainam pong mahimay ng maayos para lumabas na hindi natin inaabandona ang ating claim sa Sabah. Subalit, hindi po siya magiging bahagi nitong Maritime Zone Law dahil ito po ay patungkol sa isang land territory, not the waters adjacent to the Philippine archipelagic baseline. So wala po akong tutol doon kung yun po ay magiging refined, diplomatically sensitive, and if it will promote our national interest.
Apo, napakalinaw po ng paliwanag, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo. At ang gusto ko lamang pong ulit-ulitin ay napakahalaga po kasi itong RA 9522 na atin pong binabanggit dito. Ito po ay binalangkas bilang pagsunod doon sa UNCLOS. Napakalinaw po noon, napaliwanag din po ng ating ginagalang na Senador Tol Tolentino. Ang atin pong tinatayuan lamang muli ay huwag nating iwan. Kasi pag pinag-usapan natin kasi lagi ang UNCLOS, pag pinag-usapan natin yan, laging umiikot yan sa usapin ng West Philippine Sea. Meron tayong malinaw na dispute doon at sinasabi natin na tayo ay nanalo na sa arbitral ruling at yan ang ating pinaglalaban at tayo ay lahat ay very passionate sa usapin na yan. Ang amin lang mungkahi bilang inyong mga kapatid na Muslim at ito naman ay hindi lamang sa kapakinabangan ng Sulu o ng Tawi-Tawi o ng Bangsamoro. Itong usapin ng Sabah na katulad ng pinaglalaban ng ating mahal na Senador Tolentino sa kanyang isang bag na ebidensya ng ating talaga ang Sabah, ay ganun din natin ipaglaban ang ating karapatan sa Sabah. Sapagkat katulad ng sinabi ng ating mahal na kapatid, na hindi ito usapin lamang ng lulubog-lilitaw ng mga isla o malaliit na isla. Ito ay malaking lupa ito. Ito ay may langis. Ito ay may mga natural, masasabi nating minerals na dapat. Diyan sa sinasabi nating diplomatic ties natin sa bansang Malaysia, ay, kaibigan ko po ang ambassador niyan. Wala po itong personalan. Ito po ay patungkol lamang sa mga bansa. No? Talagang dapat ay nakikinabang ang taong bayan, ang Pilipino, diyan sa Sabah. Ngayon pa lang. Kung paano natin ginigiit diyan sa mga isla sa West Philippine Sea, dapat ay igiit din natin ang karapatan natin diyan sa Sabah, pero hindi tayo humihingi ng gulo. Dahil katunayan, meron na po diyan naging talumpati ang ating mahal na senadora, Miriam Santiago, noong 2013 sa kalagitnaan ng pagkakaroon ng krisis diyan sa North Borneo, sa Sabah. Sabi niya, hindi talaga tayo dapat umabot na. At ito naman ang gusto nating sabihin din sa Malaysia na under international law. Sabi, impartial fact-finding facilitates peaceful settlements of disputes, particularly settlement by negotiation, mediation, good offices, or conciliation. Ang liwanag po ito na sinabi ng ating mahal na senadora. International law prohibits the use of force, but there is an unwritten exemption which allows states to protect or rescue their nationals by means of armed forces in the territory of another state. However, this exception should not be invoked. Ito po yung nangyari doon kasi nagkaroon ng siege doon. Kung natatandaan nyo, may mga kababayan po tayo magmula sa Sultanate of Sulu na lumusob dyan at kanilang pinaglaban ng kanilang karapatan dyan sa Sabah. Ngunit nagkaroon po ng hindi pagkakaintindihan at dahil po dyan sa sinasabi ng mga batas na ito na sinusunod ng Pilipinas, hindi po natin nasuportahan yung ating mga kababayan na pumunta doon at pinaglaban ng kanilang karapatan. Kaya kailanman po, malinaw naman sa Malaysia na hindi naman natin magiging kailanman na option ang gerahin sila o sirahin ang ating diplomatic rights o ang ating diplomatic relation sa bawat isa. Ang sinasabi lamang po natin, dito sa pakikipaglaban natin sa West Philippine Sea, dapat makinabang din yung Sabah. Huwag natin iwan. Kung yan man po ay sa maritime, kung ano man yan, naiintindihan po natin. Malinaw na malinaw po yan. Pero bakit hindi natin ibalik yung naandun sa 1968? Kailangan ba natin sundin ang sinasabi ng UNCLOS sa ganitong bagay na, o sige, pag-usapan na lang natin yan. Total, sinabi dun sa 1987 Constitution, section ano, okay na yan, pwede na yan. Pero sa amin, sa mga kamusliman, hinihingi namin na makita namin sa batas. Makita namin mismo sa panukalang batas na nandiyan dyan na pinuproteksyonan ng Senado. Una-una na ng Senado ang karapatan ng ating mga kapatid naman ng mga Muslim at ng Pilipinas doon sa claim na sovereignty dyan sa Sabah. Hindi naman po, katulad naman po ng sinabi ng ating mahal na Senador na Tol Tolentino na siya ay nakikisama at siya ay naniniwala na dapat lang isama natin. Ay hinihingi po natin sa buong kapulungan na suportahan po ninyo ito. Sapagkat wala po tayong nilalabag na batas dito, international law, kung ano man law. Malinaw po na meron tayong claim sa Sabah, historical man yan. Ito po ay hindi sana maging mitsa, itong batas na ito pa ang isight sa atin balang araw na hindi natin, alam nyo naman, pagdating sa batas, hanapan ng hanapan yan kung saan makalulusot. Ang gusto lamang po natin, walang makalusot dito at dyan ay mailagay yan bilang amendment na kung ano yung nandun sa 1968, wala namang bago eh. Wala pong bago. Ayaw lang natin maging tahimik. Dahil doon sa 9552, naging tahimik. Naging basihan na lang natin na yung sinasabi ng seksyon na yon. Na okay na yan, understood. Hindi po pwede. Pagdating sa batas, hindi pwedeng puro understood. Dapat kailangan po, precise tayo. Kailangan naniniwala tayo na atin ang Sabah. At naniniwala po ako na yaan ang tindig ng ating mahal na senador na Francis Tol Tolentino. Yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Tama po. Gusto ko lang pong idagdag sa ating kaibigan, Senator Baisia, na hindi lang ito pong maritime zone law na ating binalangkas ay hindi lang po patungkol sa West Philippine Sea. Sinama na rin po natin ang Benham Rice kung saan gusto ko nga pong baguhin ang pangalan bilang talampas ng Pilipinas. So hindi lamang po sa West Philippine Sea, pati ito pong nasa kanang parte papunta po ng Pacific Ocean, kasama na po natin. At ulitin ko po, ang maritime zone bill po ay patungkol sa dagat. Subalit naniniwala po ako na kung ang layunin ng ating butihing senador ay patibayin ang ating claim sa Sabah at gayahin yung 1968 na batas patungkol dito, ako po ay naniniwala na pwede pong banggitin yung gawan sa darating na panahon ng sariling baseline delineation ang naturang teritoryo dahil sumasang-ayon po ako kay Senator Padilla na historically atin po yun. Atin po yun. Hindi lamang pagkatapos ng Treaty of Paris, mahaba-haba po ito, Mr. President, pero kasama niya po ako sa pagsusulong ng naturang claim at siguro po sa tamang panahon ng period of amendments kung magkakaroon ng tamang lingwahe na papasok po dito dahil kahit ito po ay patungkol, yung sabak claim po natin ay patungkol sa lupa. Ang maritime zone ay tungkol po sa dagat. Pero kung makakagawa ng tamang lingwahe ng pag-amyenda, eh hindi po ako tumututol sa aking pong kamag-anak, si Senator Padilla, patungkol po dito. As long as it will strengthen not just the bill, but our resolve that what is rightfully ours should be ours. But just the same, Mr. President, I thank the good gentleman for reawakening us to be more patriotic when it comes to crafting laws that we have to be consistent. Maraming salamat, Senator Padilla. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Ginoong Pangulo, ako po ang dapat magpasalamat dahil ako po akala ko nung araw ang dami ko nang alam patungkol sa sulu, pero nung pinakitaan niya ako ng ebidensya, talaga pong ako po ay nagpapasalamat at ako po ay binigyan ng magandang education din ng aking kapatid at kamag-anak na Senador Tolentino. Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. Mabuhay po.
Maraming salamat at maraming salamat din kay Senator Tolentino dahil pwede pala natin gamitin itong tarpaulin sa Senate plenary. Para, as a added visuals instead of the screens.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we suspend considering Senate Bill number 2492.
Actually, for the record, Your Honors, no, before we suspend, sa US Congress, ganun. When you watch the proceedings ng US senators and congressmen, meron silang easel and then they show the graph and itong mga displays. Baka wala silang screen dun. Medyo low-tech yung kanilang mga committee hearing rooms. Pero, yes, that's a good visual effect.
Marami pa ako nito, Mr. President.
Ang maganda dyan kasi pwede mong, Mr. Senator Tolentino, pwede mong ituro yung mga linya, ganun, na hindi mo naman magagawa kung nasa screen.
Be allowed to make a short manifestation, Mr. President.
Yes, please.
Thank you,
go
Mr.
ahead, Majority Leader.
President. Mr. President, in commemoration of the 125th anniversary of the First Philippine Republic, which is being celebrated today, January 23, nais ko lang ipahayag, Ginoong Pangulo, noong ika-1 ng Enero, taong 1897, 2 taon bago pasinayaan ang unang republika sa simbahan ng Barasuing Church sa Malolos noong 1899, naganap po ang pinakamadugong digmaan sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas, ang labanan sa Kakarong Sili sa Pandi, Bulacan. Mahigit 1,200 na mga katipunerong Bulakenyo ang minasakir ng mga Kastila. Sa dami po ng dugong dumanak sa digmaang iyon sa Kakarong de Sili, bumaha ng dugo at umabot pa daw po ang taas nito hanggang sa bukong-bukong. Bilang isang Bulakenyo, Ginoong Pangulo, naniniwala po ako na ito ang dugong nagpaalab at nagpatindi ng adhikain, hindi lamang ng mga revolusyonaryo, kundi ng lahat ng mga Pilipino para isulong ang independensya at itatag ang unang republika, ang unang malayang pamahalaan sa buong Asya. Ang isa po sa halos 6,000 mga revolusyonaryong Bulakenyo na nakipaglaban sa Kakarong de Sili ay ang aming ninuno na si Canuto Villanueva bilang Supremo, katuwang si Maestrong Sebio bilang Kapitan General. Ginoong Pangulo, ngayong araw po na ito ng pagpapasinaya sa unang republika, hinahamon tayong muli na bumangon at magbalik tanaw sa kasaysayan. At lubos ang paghanga ko po sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, Senate President Zubiri, dahil matapang niyo pong ibinahagi ang ilan sa mga aral na ito ng ating kasaysayan kaninang umaga sa dambana ng Barasuing Church. Kapakanan ng bayan bago ang sarili. Tulad ng inyong sinabi, Senate President Zubiri, hindi inisip ng mga nagsulat ng Malolos Constitution ang pansarili nilang kapakanan. Hindi nila sinamantala ang kanilang posisyon bilang tagapagbalangkas ng ating unang konstitusyon. I couldn't agree with you, Mr. President, when you said if the members of the Malolos Congress had wanted, they could have constitutionalized themselves into limitless power without regard for the voice of the people. As framers of the first constitution, no one could have stopped them. Instead, they chose for the Malolos Republic to be an uncompromising stand for freedom and independence. Malinaw po, Ginoong Pangulo, at alam kong narinig ng lahat ang inyong panawagan kanina. Mr. President, yung binanggit niyo pong anumang pagbabago sa ating saligang batas at dapat dumaan sa malalim na pag-aaral at konsiderasyon at hindi dapat mag-ugat ng mga makasariling mga motibo. Ilang beses na po akong naglabas-masok sa simbahan ng Barasuin, Mr. President, at aaminin ko po sa inyo na walang isang beses na ako'y hindi kinilabutan, lalo na po kapag nababasa ko yung historical marker kung saan nakasulat, dito, pinagtibay ang konstitusyon de Malolos. Mr. President, the Barasuin Church remains not only a piece or a place of worship, but the cradle of freedom and the shrine of democracy. After 125 years, we have not only preserved our republic, but we have also nurtured the flourishing of democracy within our institutions, particularly here at the People's Senate. In April 2018, Republic Act number 11014 was enacted, declaring January 23 of every year a special working holiday in the entire country to commemorate the declaration of the first Philippine Republic. A simple but very meaningful measure co-authored by this representation. Bilang isang Bulakenyo, muli Ginoong Pangulo, at bilang isang Pilipino, bilang empleyado dito sa Senado, hindi po ako magsasawang balik-balikan ang Barasuin. Aalalahanin ang mga ninuno nating nagbuwis ng buhay, ang tagumpay ng Malolos Congress, at ipaglaban ang pamana nito sa lahing Pilipino. Ang unang republika, ang ating demokrasya, at lagit-lagi unahin, higit sa lahat, ang interes ng mamamayang Pilipino. Mabuhay ang unang republika, mga Pilipinas, mabuhay ang Pilipinas. May God bless us all.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, to deliver his speech.
Our distinguished colleague from the city of Valenzuela, no other than Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, chairman of the EDCOM 2.
Thank
Please
you, thank you.
recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. In December 2019, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development released a report from the 2018 cycle of the Program for International Student Assessment, which the Philippines joined for the first time. Headlines at the time consistently highlighted a distressing reality. The Philippines ranked lowest in reading, math, and science in the 2018 study. This ignited a collective acknowledgement of the issues within our education system. The subsequent response from Congress, culminating in the passage of Republic Act number 11899, marked the beginning of a transformative journey. A year ago today, the Second Congressional Commission on Education convened to address a pressing question. Is there truly an education crisis in our country? Moreover, beyond validation, we aim to unearth the origins and persistence of this crisis. Collaborating with the nation's foremost minds, universities, and education leaders, we sought comprehensive insights to pave the way for effective solutions. Today, I stand before you to share the initial findings of a year spent unraveling the complexities of our educational landscape. These preliminary discoveries, focusing on 12 of our 28 priority areas, result from extensive data analysis and deliberations, 19 hearings, 12 focus group discussions, and 23 site visits across the nation. As we delve deeper, we anticipate a richer understanding of the challenges we face, enabling us to craft enduring solutions. We begin where the education journey starts, in early childhood. Studies show that the Philippines has among the highest prevalence of under-5 stunting in the world. And while our laws and programs adhere to global standards, implementation has been fragmented, coverage remains low, and targeting has been weak. During the critical period of cognitive development, lack of nourishment for both the mother and the child, especially in the first 1,000 days of life, possess irreversible consequences on the child's growth, learning trajectory, and life outcomes. On early childhood education, despite RA 6972 of 1990 requiring each barangay to have at least one daycare center, access remains inequitable. A study by Philippine Institute for Development Studies show that only 36% of barangays have daycares or child development centers. Disparities are also acute. In first-class municipalities, there are up to 6 centers for every 10,000 children aged 3 to 4. In 6th-class municipalities, this number drops to only 1 to 2 centers for every 10,000 children. Another challenge, those who run these centers, the workers and teachers, lack the necessary training in early childhood education. Barely half of them have college degrees. 17% have only a high school diploma, and staggering few have formal training in ECE. Since 2005, higher education institutions nationwide offering ECE teaching program have had only 3,903 graduates, less than 4,000 graduates in almost 20 years, or barely 80 annually, a number that is hardly enough to cover the needs of our population. The vast majority of these workers and teachers also hold non-permanent positions and receive an average monthly wage of only 5,000 pesos. Worse, 19% of them, about 1 in 5, receive an honorarium of only 1,000 pesos per month. The learning crisis is just as evident in basic education. While our basic education system boasts a net enrollment rate close to 90%, the results of various international and national assessments indicate that students are not learning effectively while in school. One of the main cracks in the system is the lack of efficient and high-quality learning resources, especially textbooks. Each year, we allocate over 1 billion pesos for textbook procurement, believing that children learn best when they have access to printed materials for both structured and self-directed learning. However, EDCOM2's review reveals that over the past decade, the government has successfully procured only 27 textbook titles for grades 1 to 10 students, actually utilizing less than 1 billion pesos of the allocated 12.6 billion pesos for textbooks from fiscal year 2018 to 2022. Challenges in procurement have also affected our ability to measure the learning of our students. On paper, despite the many assessments like the National Achievement Test that are supposed to guide us in developing and adjusting interventions for the basic education sector, EDCOM's analysis show that out of the 27 key stage assessments scheduled from 2016 to 2023, 13 were administered late and 11 were not administered at all. This lack of systems-level assessment data has led stakeholders to implement additional tests, creating a system of redundant assessments with varying quality, producing results that are neither comparable nor generalizable at the national level, and ultimately burdening teachers who sacrifice instruction time to administer tests without getting meaningful results. The COVID-19 pandemic led to extended school closures, affected learning and well-being. While many countries closed schools for about 79 days, the Philippines had closures lasting over a year. Despite efforts from teachers, students, and parents to adapt to distance learning, the harm to children's learning and overall well-being has been profound. Schools are now on track to address this learning loss through the National Learning Recovery Program, but as EDCOM2 discovered in consultations, interventions such as learning camps during school year breaks may not be reaching the learners who need the remediation most due to costs associated with extending extra days in school. We must strive to make learning equitable and target support those who need it the most. Higher education paints a picture of increased enrollment but heightened dropout rates. The Commission on Higher Education data shows attrition rates were at an alarming 41% in 2020. Access also remains elusive for the economically disadvantaged. Despite budget allocation, inequities persist, and the intended beneficiaries of subsidy programs deviate from their original purpose. Enrollment among the poorest students has only incrementally increased from 1.7% in 1999 to 6.1% in 2019. To further drive the point regarding inequity in access, most of those who have availed of tertiary education subsidy lie outside those whom we consider the poorest of the poor, clearly deviating from the intent of the Universal Access to Quality Education Law. In 2018, listahanan beneficiaries in the subsidy program comprised 74% of enrollees. In 2022, this share dropped to 31%, with the bulk of grantees coming from municipalities without state universities and local universities and colleges. In teacher education, disconcerting passing rates in licensure examinations persist, raising questions about the continued operation of underperforming institutions. Between 2009 to 2023, the average passing rate in the licensure examinations for elementary, which is 33%, and secondary, which is 40%, has been dismal compared to those in other professions. EDCOM also found that between 2012 and 2022, 77 HEIs offering Bachelor of Elementary Education and 105 HEIs offering Bachelor and Secondary Education continue to operate despite having consistently zero passing rates in the LET. Against this backdrop, the strengthened Teacher Education Council remains unrealized 2 years after we passed the law. During our consultations across the country, teachers consistently conveyed a recurring message. They are requesting our help, emphasizing their desire to focus on teaching rather than being assigned additional tasks. But additional tasks such as canteen management, filling up forms for the central office, and serving as 4Ps or disaster reduction, risk reduction, and management coordinators, 50 plus in all based on DepEd's inventory, pull them out of the classrooms and away from their students. While new administrative officers are being hired, 5,000 per year. Starting in 2020, this one officer is shared by multiple schools and has limited impact against the long list of ancillary and administrative tasks we have asked our teachers to take on. Some since 1925, as reported in the Monroe survey. To compound teachers' frustrations, career advancement and professional development opportunities also remain limited. Turning our focus to technical vocational education, we saw increased participation enabled by the rise in TVET institutions and expanded subsidies and scholarship provided by the government. The majority of the enrollees, however, 3.7 million between 2014 and 2022, were in community-based training programs. Unfortunately, such programs are typically outside the purview of training regulations and thus do not lead to assessment and certification for its graduates, which are in essence the very proof of their acquired skills. In fact, TESDA's 2,203 programs, only 315 or less than 15% led to a national certification. This underscores a critical gap in aligning skills acquisition with recognized standards, hindering the advancement of our large but mostly uncertified skilled workforce. We also note the maze of policies governing enterprise-based training, with 6 different government policies and programs that have since contributed confusion on the ground. This is even more concerning considering that the majority of our skilling programs, 64%, are for NC1 and NC2 levels, which yield only incremental improvements in income to our learners after training. Industry participation remains limited and prohibitive, with many stakeholders lamenting the voluminous paperwork, rigid but obsolete requirements, and long processing times of TESDA. The resounding message is crystal clear. We must invest in higher level qualifications and dynamic demands of the labor market. This demands the bureaucratic systems evolve to be more agile to respond to the rapidly changing needs of industry. At the root of this are profound challenges in governance and finance. We found that staffing levels in education agencies have not kept pace with their growing responsibilities. For example, between 2013 to 2023, CHED's budget increased by 633%, but the agency's staffing complement only increased from 543 to 666, making the agency dependent on 752 contract of service and job order personnel. Meanwhile, TESDA's provincial offices have only 7 to 12 personnel providing a range of services, including the supervision of 17 to 88 public and private EVIS. The first EDCOM envisioned the establishment of a National Coordinating Council for Education, a high-level coordinating body to ensure synergy among DepEd, CHED, and TESDA. This vision was not achieved. On the other hand, we have 68 interagency bodies working on a broad range of concerns, such as impracticable situation yields a misalignment at the system, agency, and individual levels. And while there has been substantial growth in education funding in the past decade, the need to sustain increased investments while ensuring absorptive capacity and the strategic resourcing of what can actually support learning needs to be enhanced. We must also see these issues at school level, where during our consultations, principals have lamented that their meager school maintenance and operating expenses are easily depleted by electricity bills, in some areas consuming up to 70%. This situation is further exacerbated by inequities in the Special Education Fund. The median SEF income of municipalities is at 1.6 million pesos, or a mere 4% of the median SEF income of cities and provinces. Meanwhile, first income class municipalities have 68 times more SEF compared to the sixth income class peers. With a growing list of expenditures, among them nutrition and early childhood education being charged against the SEF, it is critical that we revisit this policy to ensure equitable resourcing so that no child is left behind. Suffice to say, that these are headlines, which conclude thus: a system is defined as a regularly interacting or interdependent group of items forming a united whole. By this standard, the education system in the Philippines struggles to meet the criteria of a system. By the standards of the 1987 Constitution as well, it is short of a complete, adequate, and integrated system of education. Instead, agencies, bureaus, and offices have focused, often too faithfully, just on their respective mandates and targets, independent of one another. This is evident in the findings uncovered by the Commission in its first year. Ultimately, this has led to the miseducation or poorly delivered education of Filipino learners, bringing about a profound education crisis, as has been laid bare by both national and international assessments, issues that the Commission seeks to squarely address. The headlines we've shared offer just a glimpse into the comprehensive findings within the 400-plus pages of the EDCOM's inaugural year report. Within these pages is a measured examination of the challenges permeating our schools, from the context and roots to potential pathways forward. While these ways forward seems difficult to sparse from the sheer volume of findings, it is upon us to move from piecemeal reform to a strategic and united approach that aspires to not just find short-term solutions to the challenges we have uncovered, but to ultimately build a long-term and genuine education system. This requires a shift from a mindset that looks narrowly at our own individual targets to one that understands our work is actually interdependent of each other, from plans that are perfect on paper to those that are doable in practice. As we embark on the remaining 2 years of EDCOM, our resolve is even stronger. This year, we will examine the remaining 16 priorities addressing concerns from early childhood to higher education, including issues such as the shortage in classrooms, bullying, and research productivity. That said, we are conscious that our ultimate goal is larger than resolving issues that are symptomatic of its root cause: the need to build a future-proof system of education that will not only be effective today, but is able to evolve with the needs of the future. After all, as we realized in a review of the first EDCOM report in the 1990s, most of these issues we face today have persisted for decades, often spanning multiple administrations and complicated by overlapping government policies. We carry forward the momentum gained in our first year, a momentum fueled not just by the tireless work of our advisory council and standing committee members and our colleagues in Congress, but the solidarity of all those impassioned about Philippine education. Teachers, parents, our partners in DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, as well as advocates and stakeholders at every level who remain optimistic that we can turn things around. Solidarity in various forms sustains our collective endeavor, whether in terms of openness and honesty, understanding that we seek clarity rather than placing blame, or collaboration as we navigate the intricacies of government issues that require strong political will. The foundational step towards solutions is a microscopic examination of the problem, understanding where obstacles lie in the way of genuine reform, one that we have strived to accomplish in our one-year report. This is the role of EDCOM, translating this clarity into actionable points, so together we can work towards a nation where each learner has access to quality education. And let me personally thank the members of the Senate who are part of the commission. Let me thank our majority floor leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, who has been tirelessly attending our meetings, our FGDs, Senator Sani Angara, Senator Pia Cayetano, and also Senator Chis Escudero. Thank you, and let us work together in the remaining 2 years of our EDCOM for a brighter future for the Philippine education. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Senator Gatchalian. Congratulations to your one-year anniversary. You forget the guy who signs your checks. That's us.
Of course, Mr. President, we are forever grateful
Just kidding.
with
I was
your
just joking.
support to the EDCOM 2. And as part of the EDCOM 2, we'd like to convey our sincerest thanks and gratitude for all your support, Mr. President. May I just be allowed, Mr. President, to just insert into the records my short manifestation together with Senator Sani Angara as one of the commissioners. And if Senator Pia, I think Senator Pia Cayetano, one of the commissioners of EDCOM 2, is seeking the floor. I move that she be recognized,
Yes,
Mr.
we'd
President.
like to recognize a distinguished, honorable first female chairperson of the Blue Ribbon Committee. history for this 106 years of the Senate. No other than 107th years of the Senate. No other than Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Haba po ng introduction ninyo, but maraming salamat. Pati po dito sa likod ko, may mga, may observation pa sila sa kulay daw ng pantalon ko. Anyway, Mr. President, I join our colleague, the chairman of EDCOM, and would like to, well, like the Majority Floor Leader already did earlier, acknowledge the presence of our Advisory Council members and Standing Committee members. Everyone, Mr. President, works so hard. I need to put this on record. We had more meetings than we were capable physically of attending because obviously as senators, we also had other hearings to attend to. But obviously the members also had other commitments to attend to, but I believe almost everybody was present all the time. And we do have a 300 plus page report to present through the hard work led by our Executive Director, Mark Caroli. Thank you so much, Mark. I was looking for you. Oh, there you are. Okay. So the details of the report of our chairman are here. These are the kind of books I love because honestly, I grew up as a childhood reader. Ito yung book na maraming picture. Okay? So I'm not embarrassed to admit that I love books with pictures, very good graphics. It's just more detailed than the exhibit outside. And the chairman gave us a summary of the one-year findings, but I'd like to just zone in on one thing that he already mentioned. And this is because of my work as the Vice Chairman of the Committee on Finance in charge of the budget of DepEd. So the chairman earlier had shown slides and it is also available outside. I encourage all of you here, our guests, to take a look at it. It showed there's a whole stand there that says, since 2012, only 27 textbooks have been procured for grade 1 to 10. I would like you to all visualize this, no? Many of us are parents. One of the complaints in private school parents is yung bag ng anak nila, hindi na kayang kargahin. Siguro grade 1, 10 libro. So grade 2, 20 na. Grade 3, 30 na yon. So ibig sabihin, in private schools, yung 30 books na yon, covered yun in 3 years at least. And here we are, looking at the data, that only 27 textbooks have been procured for grade 1 to 10 since 2012. Digest that, Mr. President. The report, furthermore, has a very visual graphic that shows us in red are the grade levels that do not have books in various subjects. Imagine, Mr. President, grade 1, no books. In English, araling panlipunan. Siyempre yung picture ng staff ko malabo, so hindi ko na mabasa yung ibang subject. But suffice it to say, lahat ng subject ng grade 1, red, walang textbook. Grade 2, red din lahat, walang textbook. So magtataka pa ba tayo kung bakit nahihirapan magbasa? Magtataka ba tayo na ang pangarap ng bawat magulang, pag nagkakonting dagdag na pera, ilipat sa private school? And yet, this does not in any way diminish the contributions of our teachers, of our superintendents, of our principals. It is a shortcoming in the system because kami naman po sa Kongreso, well, at least sa Senate, I will now only speak on behalf of the Senate, Mr. President. We have always provided for this budget. In fact, a total, and this is coming out of the report, a total of 12.6 billion has been allocated for textbooks and other instructional materials, but only 4.5 billion or 35% has been obligated. And 952 million, barely a billion, has been disbursed. Bakit? Bakit nakaupo lang yung pera? Bakit hindi na ibibili? Now, there's so many things that we need to tackle, Mr. President. Of course, we have had these detailed discussions in EDCOM, but it is not enough. And so as I stood there in my blue pants, which have been noticed by my colleagues, Senator Angara, the chairman of finance, and the chairman of EDCOM, and Majority Floor Leader had just stepped out, so I don't know if you heard this conversation. We were actually, we were talking already, and they were saying, oh, baka dapat pang blue ribbon na yan. Kasi, where did the money go? Where are the books? And if it's a failure in the system, well, the money still has to be accounted for. It is a failure of delivering education to our children, Mr. President. And so, without having consulted my team, there you go. Thank you for sharing that. So, I'll just show it again once more for the public. Lahat ng red, ibig sabihin ng red, no textbook. So, if you notice, the blue is underwhelmingly in the visual, no, red talaga yung no textbook. Can you imagine grade 1 to 3 no textbook? I mean, obviously you will find some schools that have, and the reason for that, as we were also discussing, is because yung LGU nagsi-step up at ginagamit yung pondo nila. Anyway, Mr. President, I just wanted to highlight that. I wanted people to know that we have a working Senate that has been diligently looking into these issues. But gusto naman namin na we also find solutions bago naman mag-graduate ang ating chairman of the Committee on Finance, ang ating chairman of Basic Education. We want to be able to find solutions while kaya pa natin gamitin, no, yung input nila and yung passion nila to find to solve these problems. So there's going to be much more said and studied on all this, Mr. President. But for now, I'm proud to be a member of EDCOM. And again, I speak on behalf of the commissioners. We thank all the people here and not here, and even our international partners for helping us improve and really address the problems, the miseducation, the failed system of the Philippine education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I cannot agree more with the statements made by our new chairperson of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. Mr. President, Senator Sani Angara, who is also one of the commissioners of EDCOM 2. And let me say, Mr. President, yung EDCOM 1, pinangunahan ng kanyang dakilang ama, ang ating idolo, ating mentor, Senator Edgardo Angara, Mr. President. So I move that we recognize Senator Sani Angara, Mr. President.
Yes, a distinguished colleague from the province of Aurora, no other than the chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Sani Angara, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Dear colleagues, I just want to echo the report. I want to support the report made by our very hardworking chairperson of Basic Education and the EDCOM, Senator Sherwin, as well as by our Senior Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and now first woman chair of the Blue Ribbon, Sen Pia, in their remarks earlier. Just support them and as well as their recommendations, and as well as echo their thanks to our very capable and hardworking EDCOM staff led by Carol Markey, and of course his pool of experts who range from former commissioners, former and current presidents of universities, experts in various fields who really have devoted their time for no other reason than just love of country and their wish to see the next generation succeed, Mr. President. And I just want to add that thanks to our 4 commissioners, now 5 with Senator, the Minority Leader, that we have acted already on the recommendations made by EDCOM, unlike before where we would wait for the full report until we act. But I think that there are a lot, the problems are so numerous that and so urgent. So we've, among the amendments recommended by our chair, Sen Win, who's also a vice chair of the Finance Committee, and Sen Pia, who is the chair of the subcom on DepEd and other very important institutions. So their recommendations have been carried in the 2024 budget, which includes the certification of graduates, because one reason for the non-employment of our vocational strand graduates was the non-certification or not having the accreditation. So hindi po sila hinahire ng mga employers. Yun yung pangako natin sa mga magulang na kailangan makatapos ng additional 2 years para hindi na kailangan magkolehiyo. Walang na-hire dahil wala yung certification. That is finally now in the budget for the first time after over a decade. Mr. President, nagdagdag tayo ng pondo dun sa nutrition because of the finding that of stunting and malnutrition. There's funds for the hiring of assessors, research funds, the development of training manuals for inclusive education, for workshops for our master teachers, for a summit for the development of a concept note for the local school boards, among many others, Mr. President. I just wanted to place that on record that the work of the EDCOM has been so good and outstanding that it has served as a basis and a spring for this chamber to spring into action and fund the initiatives so that this report is not just a report, but it's actually a set of reforms that has already, as we speak, is already being implemented. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, and thank you to our hardworking chair and commissioners.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I just put into the records that this is not actually a privileged speech. As I earlier mentioned, I spoke with our chairperson, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. This is a report pursuant to Section 7, letter L of Republic Act number 11899, or the Second Congressional Commission on Education Act, the EDCOM 2. It states there that EDCOM 2 shall submit periodic reports to Congress. And let me also take this opportunity once again, Mr. President, to thank our Executive Director, Carol Mark, the staff of EDCOM 2, Attorney Joseph Estrada, the EDCOM Advisory Council, And those who are present here today, specifically, Mr. President, Her Excellency HKU, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Lai Tai Bin, the Vietnamese Ambassador to the Philippines, and Ms. Rebecca Eubanks and Ms. Lucelle Chen of USA. They are our Education Commission partners. And so again, we express our deepest gratitude and thanks to these individuals, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension so to allow our guests and even the EDCOM commissioners, Mr. President, to present to you the EDCOM 2 report, Mr. President. So,
Yes, before I suspend session, I'd just like to thank all our partners. You know, we in government, we're expected to do our job, but the partners such as the Vietnamese ambassador together with the Australian ambassador, USAID, and all the NGOs that are here supporting us, we thank you. As you can see, it's a yeoman's job trying to fill the gaps in our different social programs for our people. And any help that we can get is very welcome help indeed, particularly in the education sector. So we thank you all for your support. And of course, to the staff of EDCOM, the Secretariat, job well done on your first.
Majority Leader, I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege. Ginoong Pangulo, simula po noong nakamit natin ang ating kalayaan, 8 bersyon ng konstitusyon ang umiral sa ating bansa. The 1989 Malolos Constitution, the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, the Jones Law of 1916, the 1935 Constitution, the 1943 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, the 1986 Freedom Constitution, and our present Constitution, the 1987 Constitution. Sa 8 Philippine Constitution na aking nabanggit, tanging sa 1987 Constitution lamang po natin matagpuan ang People's Initiative bilang pamamaraan para amendahan ang konstitusyon. Isa po ang People's Initiative sa mga probisyon na nagbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa mamamayan na magpasimuno ng reforma sa pamahalaan. In the words of Justice Panganiban in his separate opinion in the case of Miriam Defensor Santiago versus Comelec, and I quote, "Initiative like referendum and recall is a new and treasured feature of the Filipino constitutional system. All three are institutionalized legacies of the world-admired EDSA people power. Like elections and plebiscites, they are hallowed expressions of popular sovereignty. They are sacred democratic rights of our people to be used as their final weapons against political excesses, opportunism, inaction, oppression, and misgovernance, as well as the preserved instruments to exact transparency, accountability, and faithfulness from their chosen leaders." End of quote. I repeat, Mr. President, it is a sacred democratic right of our people to be used as their final weapons against political excesses, opportunism, inaction, oppression, and misgovernance. Ito po ang isa sa purposes ng People's Initiative as envisioned by the framers of the 1987 Constitution. Pinahahalagahan po ng saligang batas ang gampanin ng mamamayan na siguruhin na patuloy na lalamanin ng mga pahina nito ang kanilang mga interes at kapakanan. After all government authority emanates from the people. However, if the people are being misled, deceived, and coerced to sign a piece of document proposing to amend the Constitution for a certain amount of money, then the initiative is invalidated. Worse, its intentions are tarnished. The sacredness of initiative is stained by selfish motives. Ang pinagtataka po natin ngayon, bakit tila ang umiikot na so-called People's Initiative ay isang politician's initiative? Pareho pa rin silang PI, Mr. President. This is an insult and outright affront to the space duly afforded to us by the Constitution. A space intended to accommodate our people's capacity to introduce reforms. Ginoong Pangulo, mga kababayan, mayroon pong 3 pamamaraan upang baguhin ang mga titik ng ating konstitusyon. Ang 2 sa 3 proseso na ito ay nangangailangan ng direktang partisipasyon ng mga halal na mga mambabatas, mga kongresista at tayong mga senador. Nag-iisa po ang pamamaraan na nakareserba para sa taong bayan para amendahan ang saligang batas. Ito po ang tinatawag natin na People's Initiative. Bakit po kaya hindi gamitin ng mga politician na nagsusulong ng Politicians Initiative ang dalawang pamamaraan na nasa konstitusyon kung gusto nilang baguhin ang ating saligang batas. Bakit hindi pa sapat sa ilang mga mamabatas na mapagkalooban ng dalawang pagpipilian para baguhin ang konstitusyon? Kailangan ba na pati ang direktang inilaan para sa ating mga mamamayan ay kukunin at gagamitin ng mga gahamang politiko? Tila Ginoong Pangulo, sa pagdaan ng mga araw, mas maraming katanungan pa ang nadadagdag kaysa mga kasagutan sa Politicians Initiative. Pero isa po ang nabigyang linaw. Mayroong mga kumikilos upang manlinlang ng ating mamamayan. Mga individual at mga grupo na tila ang tingin lamang sa pamahalaan ay isang negosyo na pwedeng pagkakitaan. Handa silang mamuhunan sa pagbili ng mga pirma o lagda. Napakadali lamang, lalo na kung hindi naman kinabukasan ng bayan ang kanilang turing dito, kundi isang tseke na maaari nilang ipalit sa salapi pagdating ng panahon. Nakalulungkot na ang pinagsamantalahan ay siyang mga kababayan natin mga walang-wala sa buhay. Sila na ang mga nagdarahop at naghihikahos. Silang mga nagugutom at walang hanap buhay. May mga pagkakataon na ilan sa ating mga kababayan na pumirma sa kadudad-dudang People's Initiative ay wala ng ibang makakapitan kundi patalim. Kapalit ng munting halaga ay pagsangla ng kaluluwa. Nakagagalit na silang mga vulnerable ang palaging target ng panlilinlang ng mga politikong may mga pansariling motibo. Nakakapanlumong isipin kung paano sinamantala ang kahirapan sa buhay ng mga mamamayan para lamang sa pangsariling kapakanan ng mga nasa kapangyarihan. Minsan naisip ko, Mr. President, kung nangyari ito nung bata pa ako, malamang kasama ang aking mga magulang sa mga hihikayatin nilang pumirma. At dahil mahirap lang kami, baka nga pumirma sila. Kaya ganun na lamang ang aking galit, Mr. President, sa pananamantalang ito. Pumirma ka na lang, bahala na kung hindi naintindihan, di balik, may 100 pesos ka o kaya 3,000 pesos, may panghapunan na kayo ng pamilya mo. I feel it is my obligation to stand up for the poor because I know what it is like to believe that you do not have a choice. It is my obligation to tell every single one who is listening to me right now, be it inside these halls or on some video being aired, you always have a choice. And this Senate is ready to support you in making a real, informed, dignified choice. Ginoong Pangulo, nais ko pong susugan ang pananawagan ng ating Majority Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva. Hinihikayat po natin ang ating mga kababayan na niloko, pinilit maging iyong mga nakatanggap ng panunuhol kapalit ang kanilang pagpirma sa isang dokumento kung saan hindi malinaw sa paglahad kung ano ang reforma na gustong iamyenda sa konstitusyon. Lumantad kayo at huwag matakot. Tulungan niyo po ang inyong Senado na pananagutin ang mga nagsamantalang sa mga kahinaan. Laging bukas ang bulwagan ng Senado at handang pangalagaan ang sinumang nais magsiwalat ng katotohanan at nagmamahal sa ating bayan. May kasabihan po tayo, walang manluloko kung walang magpapaloko. But you know, Mr. President, I think this saying is a case of victim blaming, lalong-lalo na sa sitwasyong ito. Sa kasalukuyang panahon, tingnan natin ito mula sa ibang perspektiba. Patawan ng parusa ang mga naluloko at huwag ipataw ang sisi sa mga inosenteng naloko. If the ill-intentioned have done their part in attempting to distort and destroy the very spirit of initiative, I implore this Senate, let us not allow such distortion to succeed. Let us take the initiative, so to speak, to protect our people from sinister motives. Protect, most especially, the ones who are unable to do it for themselves. The Senate does not and will never infringe on the right of the people to exercise the right guaranteed by the Constitution. Justice Panganiban declares that, and I quote, the right to propose amendments to the Constitution is really a species of the right of free speech and free assembly. And certainly, it would be tyrannical and despotic to stop anyone from speaking freely and persuading others to conform to his/her beliefs. As the eminent Voltaire once said, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. After all, freedom is not really for the truth we agree with, but as Justice Holmes wrote, freedom for the truth that we hate. End of quote. I would like to assure our Filipino people that the Senate, as the last bastion of democracy, does and always will support the people's clamor to institute reforms, whether this would be crafting laws or amending the Constitution itself. The Senate exists because of the people, and we will continue to push for the uplifting of the life of every Filipino. In the event that our people would come to truly believe that it is only through their own efforts that they can rewrite the letters of the Constitution to a form and content that they think embodies their ideals, I am sure that the Senate will be the first to support. However, the Senate will also be the first to condemn if the right to people's initiative is being bastardized by enterprising politicians. The Senate will not allow and will therefore condemn any form of threat, coercion, or bribery that compromises the future of our country and our people. I call on the persons behind this deceptive and fraudulent people's initiative. Make amends, not to our Constitution, but to the people, our people, whom you have maliciously enticed to unknowingly sell their future. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat, Senator Bato de la Rosa. Mabuhay ka. Very passionate speech.
Mr. President, may I be allowed to just make or pose some clarificatory questions, Mr. President? If the gentleman from Davao and Bohol would yield to some clarificatory questions, Mr. President, from this representation.
Yes, if he so wishes.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. At the onset, Mr. President, let me state for the record my sincerest gratitude and sa Tagalog, Mr. President, yung pagsaludo sa isang senador na re-electionist ito, Mr. President. Hindi marunong matakot na gawin ang tama. Hindi marunong matakot na ipaglaban ang karapatan ng mamamayang Pilipino. Let me just put that on record, Mr. President. I salute, whether you agree with him or not, you salute, Mr. President, the character of this gentleman who is here today in this August chamber to deliver such a compelling and passionate privilege speech, Mr. President. Mr. President, ang unang katanungan ko sa ating kasama dito sa bulwagang ito, binanggit niyo po, Ginoong Pangulo, yung third mode of changing the Constitution, which is people's initiative, Mr. President. Pwede mo bang malaman natin, Ginoong Pangulo, na pag people's initiative, kailangan po ba non-partisan? Kailangan po ba hindi ginagamit ang anumang makinarya ng pamahalaan ng gobyerno? Ginagamit ang programa ng iba't ibang departamento para lamang makakalap ng pirma? Ito po ba ay natural? Sapagkat marami ho sa ating mga kababayan, Ginoong Pangulo, ang nagtatanong. Ito ba ay natural na nangyayari? Hindi ho bulag ang mga Pilipino, Ginoong Pangulo. Nakita natin sa telebisyon, narinig natin sa mga radyo, na-monitor natin sa social media. Isang kababayan natin, kaya ho ako'y bilib na bilib sa ating kasamahan dito sapagkat inilagay niya yung kanyang sarili doon sa mga taong binanggit niya na parang nagkakapit patalim na lamang, Ginoong Pangulo, sapagkat tama po ba natatanggap ka ng ayuda mula sa pamahalaan, programa ng pamahalaan, pero kailangan mong pumirma sa isang dokumentong hindi mo naiintindihan? Ito po ba'y natural? Ito po ba ay people's initiative, Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo?
Well, Mr. President, Majority Leader, as I've said, sa nakikita natin na nangyayari ngayon, tila lumalabas na hindi naman talaga ito kagustuhan ng taong bayan. So this is not a people's initiative. This is politicians' initiative. Kung sino yung mga politiko na nasa likuran na nagpapatakbo nitong people's initiative kuno. So, very clear yan, Mr. President. At yung pangalawang sinabi mo, Mr. President, na natural ba na gamitin yung pondo ng bayan, katulad ng AX, pondo ng gobyerno, to entice these people to vote or to sign, to get their signature? Ay, yun po, Mr. President, ay lantarang vote buying kung tutuusin. Vote buying po talaga yan. Dahil, these people are enticed to give their signature in exchange of the money that is being offered to them through the government programs and services like AX, TUPAD, and what other programs that we have, Mr. President.
Ginoong Pangulo, ako ho ay humahanga sa ating kasama dito sa Senado sapagkat alam ko ho, siya ho ay taga Davao, taga Bohol, ngunit malalalim yung Tagalog na ginamit, Filipino na ginamit ng ating kasama dito sa Senado. Natatandaan ko ho, yung binanggit niyang isang salita, naghihikahos, nagdarahop. Yung Pangulo, ako po, habang nakikinig ako sa ating kasamahan dito sa Senado, hindi ko mapigil kung hindi mapukaw yung silakbo ng aking dugo sapagkat binabanggit ng ating kasamahan yung pananamantala. Gaano ho ba kabigat yung ginagawang pananamantala na ating nararanasan sa ngayon, Ginoong Pangulo, na isang Pilipino, idadanggel mo yung salapi mula sa DSWD, yung pangako na ikaw ay pipirma kapalit ang ayuda ng pamahalaan, yung pangako na ipirma ka lang, makakasama ka na sa mabibigyan ng biyaya ng mga politiko. Kapalit ang iyong pirma. Ito ba yung insulto, Mr. President? Ito ba yung insulto sa iyo, Mr. President? Ito ba yung insulto sa ating institusyon sapagkat ang bawat isa na nagluklok sa atin bilang senador ng Republika ng Pilipinas, nung tayo po ay binoto bilang kinatawan nila as national leaders, Mr. President. Not as district representatives, not as party list representatives, but national leaders. Is this an insult, Mr. President? Is this disenfranchisement, Mr. President? Disenfranchisement of the very sacred right of every Filipino, the right to suffrage, Mr. President. May we know the thoughts of the gentleman from Davao, Mr. President? Well, Mr. President, sa simula pa lang, talagang nakikita na natin na yung layunin nito ay iba, Mr. President. Because nobody dares to admit that they are the ones behind this so-called People's Initiative. Walang umaangkin. Pero sa Bisaya pa, Mr. President, ako'y natingala. Ako'y nagtataka. Bakit merong lumabas na timeline na nakaprogram na doon kung anong mga courses of action, anong mangyayari in the next coming days. Pero hanggang ngayon na ayaw nilang aminin na sino talaga ang nasa likuran nito. Very clear po, Mr. President. Ako po ay may nakausap na congressman. Hindi ko lang sabihin. Sinabi niya, talagang instruction yan sa aming liderato ng Kongreso. Sa mababang kapulungan. Ang instruction pa nga sa kanila is not only to get 3% of the number of registered voters in their respective congressional district, but to get at least 20%. That is according to my friend Congressman, Mr. President. So, kung yan ang ginagamit yung ating pundo ng gobyerno para makakalap ng perma, hindi lang yan insulto, Mr. President, para sa akin. Kung meron pang word na mas mabigat pa sa insulto. Kaya nga, minsan, maiisip ko, Mr. President, tila ba yung sinasabi natin na interparliamentary courtesy ay parang napapalitan na ng interparliamentary treachery, Mr. President. Sa ginawa nilang yan sa atin, kung saan gusto nilang kapunin, gusto nilang tanggalan ng power ang Senado para magbigay boses sa lahat ng Pilipino. We are not only elected by a single congressional district, we are elected by the whole of the Filipino people. Gusto nilang tanggalan ng boses ang Senado by the mere subject of their People's Initiative, which is voting jointly, Mr. President. Hindi lang ito insulto, Mr. President, kung isang pang-iisa, isang panlalamang, at isang, I don't know kung ano pang Tagalog na pwede kong sabihin dito. Kung Bisaya lang, Mr. President, mas marami pa akong masasabi. Pero wag na lang, hindi maintindihan ng lahat ng Pilipino yung aking sasabihin. Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, as I speak before you today, Mr. President, I am hearing and seeing some news reports from leaders of the other chamber quoting this representation's name, Mr. President. na may ebidensya daw po ba, Mr. President? Ginoong Pangulo, gusto kong banggitin sa bulwagang ito, kahapon nag-launch tayo sa social media lamang, Mr. President. Para sa mga lalaki at babaeng nabudol, nasamantala, at na-realize nila na sila ay niloko at ginoyo ng pekeng initiative na ito, PI din, Mr. President. After 24 hours, Mr. President, libo-libong complaints, picture ng text messages, picture ng mga aktibidades, Mr. President, ang ating nakalap. 90%, Ginoong Pangulo, 90% na mga nagre-reklamo, sinasabi ang pangalan ng kongresista, pangalan ng mga staff ng kongresista, pangalan ng mga chiefs of staff ng kongresista. Mr. President, nagkataon lang ho ba ito? Nagkataon lang ho ba ito, Mr. President? Ang tanong ko. Sa tingin niyo po, Ginoong Pangulo, kayo po na nagsabi na meron din po kayong nakausap na ilang kongresista. Meron din po ako. Alam niyo, Ginoong Pangulo, napakasakit po para sa akin magsalita ng ganito dahil galing po tayo sa House of Representatives. Kayo, Ginoong Pangulo, Senator Risa, Senator Sunny, Senator JB, Senator Win, Senator Mark, lahat po tayo galing ng House of Representatives. Ako po, Ginoong Pangulo, wala akong Joel Villanueva kung walang House of Representatives. Lahat po ng natutunan ko, paano ako makakapag-contribute for nation building, natutunan ko sa House of Representatives. Kaya masakit po sa akin, Ginoong Pangulo, ang makita 90% ng reklamo, House of Representatives. Nagtataon ho ba ito, Ginoong Pangulo? Pagsasalita na po ako, yung alam ko ho, personal, hindi lang yung sinumbong sa akin na sinasabi kong 90%. Sa aking lalawigan, ito yung pinakamasakit. Lalawigang tinubuan ko, Mr. President. 20 taon mahigit ang hinintay bago nagkaroon ng representante ang dakilang lalawigan ng Bulacan dito sa bulwagang ito. Tapos may ganito, Mr. President. Nakausap ko yung mga konsehal, nakausap ko yung mga kapitan, nakausap ko pati toda, Mr. President, na ginamit ng mga kongresista doon. Doon nga po sa Hagunoy, pinapirma sila. Sa Hagunoy, Bulacan, hindi alam kung ano yung pinipirmahan. Meron pang iba, sabi, online game lang. Nanalo kang 300 pesos, i-Gcash sa'yo. Bigay mo lang yung telepono mo. Nandito po. At hindi kagaya noong mga nagpalabas ng TV ad at nagpupush ng peking inisyatibo na ito, hindi nila mapinpoint kung sino sila. Handa po ako ibigay ito. Handa akong sabihin kung sino itong mga ito. Ipakita itong mga ebidensya na ito, Mr. President. I'm just wondering, Mr. President, bakit ganito? Nakita ko po si Senator Cynthia Villar, galing din po sa House of Representatives. Bakit ganito, Ginoong Pangulo? Hindi ho ba pagpapalit ng kalye, pangalan ng kalye dito sa Pilipinas, pag pinapalitan po ang kalye, pangalan ng kalye, Ginoong Pangulo, matanong ko po ang ating distinguished colleague, pag pinapalitan po ba ang kalye, pangalan ng kalye dito sa Pilipinas, pagkatapos po bang maipasa sa House of Representatives, batas na po ito, palitan na ang kalye?
Hindi pa, mga Ginoong Pangulo.
May Senado pa.
Dadaan pa yan sa Senado.
Pagkatapos may bycam. Mr. President, hindi pangalan ng kalye ang pinapalitan. Kaluluwa ng bayan natin ang pinapalitan. Na for almost 40 years, hindi ginagalaw. Na for almost 40 years, hindi basta-basta pinakikialaman. Bakit? Kaluluwa ng bayan to. Now you see, with your own eyes, on television, now you hear the complaints of the people. And I will use and borrow the words of Senator Bato de la Rosa, yung mga nagdarahop, yung mga naghihikahos, mga nangangailangan ng tulong, nangangailangan ng ayuda ng gobyerno, umaasa sa tulong ng gobyerno, pagsasamantalahan natin para lamang ma-extend ang termino natin, para lamang ma-abolish ang Senado. Mr. President, kung gusto ng taong bayang i-abolish ang Senado, I don't mind. If it is the will of the people, I don't mind. Ano mang klaseng gusto ng ating mga kababayan, dalhin man ang ating bayan sa kangkungan, dalhin man ang ating bayan sa impyerno, kung yan ang gusto ng taong bayan, susunod tayo. Re-respetuhin natin. Pero Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, kung ayuda ng gobyerno, ipagkakait mo. Kung hindi ka pipirma,
Hindi ka makatanggap.
hindi ka makakatanggap. At ano ito? Katang-isip ni Senator Bato de la Rosa? Katang-isip ni Joel Villanueva? Bakit hindi natin tanungin ang bayan? Bakit hindi natin tanungin si Juan de la Cruz? Ito ba ay People's Initiative? Mr. President, I can go on and on, but I just wanted to also ask our dear colleague, where do we go from here, Mr. President? How do you want this privilege speech, Mr. President? Pagkatapos nating i-refer, and I suppose, if I may, mamaya ay i-refer ito dun sa committee ni Senator Amy Marcos ng Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation. Ano yung pwede nating magawa dito, Mr. President? Ngayon na pagkatapos ng meeting ng ating pinuno ng Senado at ng pinuno ng Kamara de Representantes na tayo po'y nagsunog ng kilay para ayusin at siguruhin yung mga gusto kuno ng ating mga kausap na marami din naman sa atin pabor doon sa economic provisions. Kaya nga po natin pinasa yung Public Services Act. 5 sektor lang yung hindi natin pinagalaw na magkaroon ng 100% ownership, Mr. President. Ngayon, Mr. President, where do we go from here? Kailangan pa ba nating ispilingin yan, Mr. President? Kailangan pa bang i-memorize yan kung seryoso yung ating mga kausap, Mr. President? Sa pagpapasa nitong joint resolution na ito? That's my question, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, if I may add, kanina, nag-start yung aking investigation on the alleged scam ng ayuda scam na nangyayari sa Davao del Norte. At kami noon lahat na nandoon na senador ay akala namin yun ang pinaka-the worst na nangyari. Yung 10,000 na ayuda na binigay ay binawi yung 9,000 at 1,000 lang ang binigay sa ating mga kababayan na pumirma. So, out of 10,000, 9,000 binulsa ng mga nag-recruit sa kanila at ang 1,000 ay binigay sa kanila. Akala ko, the worst na yun na pangyayari. Pero if I am going to borrow the words of our majority leader, hindi lang 9,000 ang katumbas ng ginagawa ngayon ng People's Initiative, kundi kaluluwa ng ating bayan ang kapalit ng perma ng ating mga kababayan. So dapat ang Senado ay hindi matutulog. I implore all our colleagues, wag nating hayaan ito. Magtutulungan tayo dito. Hindi natin papayagan na masisira itong ating bansa dahil lang sa kagustuhan ng ilang mga politiko na gustong mag-perpetuate in power, Mr. President. Thank you.
With the permission of the majority floor leader.
Mr. President.
Yung kaninang binanggit mo, Senator Bato, ang 10,000, kinupit ang 9,000, kinuha. O kinupit o ninakaw, binawi yung 9,000 at naiwan yung 1,000.
Yes,
at
Mr.
para yan pumirma sa People's Initiative.
Hindi yun, Mr. President. Iba yun.
Iba yun.
Iba.
Kasi dalawang krimen, kung yan ang nangyari, dalawang krimen ang nangyari doon. So, ang sinasabi mo, ito ay ayuda lamang.
Ayuda lamang. Ayuda lamang. Ang comparison lang na pinapakita ko is that yung katumbas ng perma nila ay 9,000 na napunta sa korupsyon. Pero itong ginagawang People's Initiative, ang katumbas ng kanilang perma ay kinabukasan ng ating bayan. That is immeasurable. Ang value po niyan ay hindi po ma-quantify, Mr. President. So, napakahirap po i-reconcile itong mga latest na pangyayari sa ating bansa, Ginoong Pangulo.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may I also ask the gentleman from Davao and Bohol, where do we go from here, Mr. President? May mga COMELEC officials na po sa ilang parte ng ating bansa, whether district or regional, na tumatanggap nitong mga peking pirma na pinagsamantalahan, pirma na nagoyo yung pinirma, Mr. President. Where do we go from here, Mr. President? Ano bang accountability, Ginoong Pangulo, ng ating mga opisyales ng COMELEC para tignan ito? Kasi meron pong isang nagsasabi sa isang artikulo na ang tanging mandato lamang ng COMELEC ay tumanggap ng pirma. Hindi na po nila iniimbestigahan ito. Meron naman nagsasabing pwedeng mag-imbestiga. Ngunit sa aking pagkakaalam, Mr. President, matagal-tagal na rin po tayo dito sa mundo ng lehislatura, Mr. President. As I mentioned, I was a term member of the House, and this is my second term here in the Senate. Hindi naman po ganun talaga makapag-imbestiga ang COMELEC sa mga ganitong gawain, Mr. President. So, what can we do, Mr. President?
I think, Mr. President, right now, we cannot stop COMELEC from accepting all the signatures being
submitted to them because it is their duty to receive all those signatures. But doon na lang natin sila sisingilin, Mr. President, sa kanilang function sa pag-verify. Yung verification nila, dapat ito ay gagawin nila ng totoo at may halong konsensya, Mr. President. Sana may konsensya sila sa kanilang gagawing verification later on, Mr. President.
Perhaps, Mr. President, I would encourage my distinguished colleague, Senator Bato, to look into this specific law, if there is any, Mr. President, to not just ministerially accept all these signatures despite the fact that they are very much aware of what is happening. In fact, Mr. President, just today, I made an announcement that because just like our dear colleague, hindi ko humasikmura ito, Mr. President. Hindi ko humasikmura talaga. Ako'y mag-retire na after my term here in the Senate, Mr. President. And hindi ko lang humasikmura itong ginagawang paglapastangan sa payak na karapatan ng ating mga kababayan. Lalong-lalo na sa pagpapalit ng ating konstitusyon. If there's one word to describe what's happening right now, Mr. President, nakakasalukasok. Nakakasalukasok itong ginagawang ito, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is bigger than us, bigger than you and me, bigger than all of us, bigger than this institution. When you talk about the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. Mr. President, perhaps we can do something about it. Kung alam natin na may problema, at gaya ng nabanggit ko, Mr. President, ako mismo ay willing na spearhead yung pong pagbawi ng pirma ng ating mga kababayan. Kaya sa mga nanonood po sa atin, live streaming sa Facebook o kung saan man, inaanyayahan ko po kayo, gaya ng binanggit kanina ni Senator Bato, magsumbong po kayo. Aalalayan po namin kayo. All you need to do is magkaroon ho kayo ng affidavit. Gagawa ho namin kayo ng form. Punta lang ho kayo sa inyong lokal na COMELEC office sa inyong lugar. At sabihin ang nangyari at binabawi ninyo ang inyong pirma. Kasi ho ako, sa aking experience, Mr. President, doon ho sa aming lalawigan, lalo na sa aming distrito, nakakalungkot po yung nangyari sa aming distrito. Wala ho akong nakausap ni isa. Ako'y gagalangin ko ho, Mr. President, Senator Bato de la Rosa, gagalangin ko po yung aking kababayan na magsabi sa akin, gusto ko itong pagpapalit ng ating konstitusyon, gusto kong revisahin, gusto kong tignan. Gusto kong i-review. Gusto kong magkaroon ng unicameral form of government. Gusto kong buwagin ng Senado. Gagalangin ko po eh. Actually, gagalangin ko po. Wala ho akong problema doon. Pero sa aming distrito, wala pa ho akong nakausap ni isa na naiintindihan yung kanyang pinirmahan. Ni isa na nagsabing pinapirma siya at in-explain kung ano nga ba itong People's Initiative na voting jointly ang Kamara at Senado. Na ang Speaker o ang Senate President, hindi and, Mr. President, Speaker or Senate President may call to convene a Constituent Assembly. Wala ho akong narinig na gano'n. Ulitin ko po, Mr. President, gagalangin ko kung yun ay bukal sa loob ng aking kababayan. Sino man po sila, nasaan man po sila. Pero ulitin ko po, sa aming distrito, wala pa ho ako nakausap.
Well, Mr. President, the mere fact na ito'y ginawa nila while we are on break. Nasa Christmas vacation tayo, nagkakaroon sila ng blitzkrieg attack. Mr. President, how do you qualify that kind of situation? Ha? Naka-break tayo, bigla na lang, lumabas ito ngayon, at wala na. We're caught off guard.
Are you saying there's bad faith, Mr. President?
Well, I presume there is bad faith. Then, pwede namang sabihin sa atin, prangkahin tayo, na gusto namin ito. Kung meron silang respeto sa atin, pwede naman lang sabihin na gusto namin ito, introduce namin ito, sa ayaw nyo sa gusto, we will go for it. Pero wag naman yung patalikod, Mr. President, na mabulaga na lang tayo habang tayo nasa vacation. Ganun na lang.
What about the result of our caucus, Mr. President? Tayo ay nag-caucus, if you recall, Mr. President, para pag-usapan itong joint resolution na supposed to be ay ating tatalakayin ngayong mga panahon na ito, ngayong araw na ito, Mr. President. What do you think would happen to this, Mr. President, after knowing na parang may bad faith, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, hanggang ngayon, ako po'y tuliro. Anong gagawin natin? So I leave it up to the leadership of the Senate at pag-usapan po natin yan para magkakaroon tayo ng united stand on this particular issue. I leave it up to I am a good soldier. I will follow our Senate President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Diyan po nagwawakas ang aking maikling interpellation sa ating kasama dito sa Senado. Muli, taus-puso akong nagpapasalamat at sumasaludo sa ating kasama sa Senado, Senator Bato de la Rosa, na hindi natatakot banggitin ang katotohanan sapagkat ngayong araw na ito ginugunita natin ang Malolos Congress. At ang nakakatuwa po, Ginoong Pangulo, sa mga delegado ng Malolos Congress, mayroon po silang isang salita. Matatayuan natin ang paninindigan ng ating mga framers ng Malolos Congress. At gaya ng ating kasamahan dito sa Senado, Senator Bato de la Rosa, nais kong ilagay sa talaan ng bulwagang ito na hindi po tayo papasindak, na hindi po tayo titiklop sa anumang uri ng atake. Hindi lamang sa institusyong ito, hindi lamang sa ating mga sarili, kundi atake sa karapatan ng bawat mamamayang Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Maraming salamat, Senator Bato de la Rosa.
Maraming salamat, Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Pre-
Hangang-hanga din po ako sa ating mahal na kaibigan, kababayan, taga Mindanao, Senator Bato de la Rosa. He's slowly becoming a statesman of the Senate. And he's no longer looking at local politics or petty issues. He's now taking up the challenges of our institution. And I salute him for that. Maraming salamat, sir.
Mr. President, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is also seeking the floor. I move that he be recognized.
Ang ating kapatid, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is recognized.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo, at sa ating pinunong mayorya. Gusto ko lamang pong sundan ang napakagandang talumpati ni Senator Bato de la Rosa. Ganun din po ang iminungkahi at ibinato ng ating pinunong mayorya patungkol po sa People's Initiative. Bilang ako po ay chairman ng Committee ng Amendments and Revision, nais ko pong ipaalam sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na ako po mismo ay may sarili ding People's Initiative. Iyan po ay aking isinusulong at nais ko pong ipaalam sa lahat na wala pong sa konstitusyon natin, Article 70, napakaliwanag, na meron po talagang tatlong moda. At yan ng Constitutional Assembly, CONCON, at People's Initiative. Ang nais ko lamang pong linawin, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, na wala pong masama sa People's Initiative. Wala. Yan po ay kasama sa konstitusyon at yan po ay pinalalakas. Katulad po ng sinabi ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, ito po ay esensya ng ating demokrasya. Ang nagkakaroon lamang po ng hindi naaayon sa saligang batas na umiiral sa atin ngayon ng 1987 Constitution, malinaw po doon sa Article 6 din ang legislative body, ang paghihiwalay ng Senado at ng House of Representatives. Ang magkahiwalay na kapangyarihan, lalong-lalo na sa tinatawag nating voting powers. Nagkaroon lamang po tayo ng pagkakataon na maging suliranin yung voting sapagkat doon sa Article 17 hindi malinaw na naisulat. Pero doon sa Article 6, Section 21, kung hindi po ako nagkakamali, in time of war, malinaw po doon na ang Senado at ang House ay meron silang magkasamang pagpupulong at sila ay boboto separately. Napakalinaw po nun. Hindi lang po natin maintindihan kung bakit nagkaroon ng People's Initiative na ipinipilit ang voting jointly. Ang pag-uusapan natin ay saligang batas. Ito po ay talagang kailangan po natin pag-usapan ng mahaba kasama po ang malaking kapulungan, ang House. Hindi po ito para po sa akin pong ibinigay niyong komite. Pinag-aralan ko po ito, ang ating konstitusyon. Ito pong voting jointly ay lumalabag sa artikulo ng legislative body sapagkat meron pong paghihiwalay ng kapangyarihan. At yan pong kapangyarihan, yung voting, kasama po yan. At malinaw sa ating konstitusyon. Kaya mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, hayaan niyo po akong makapagpasalamat sa bumubuo ng ating Senado at inyo pong ipinaglalaban yung ating kapangyarihan na magkaroon ng voting separately. Sapagkat ito po ang sinasabi ng 1987 Constitution. At ang People's Initiative po ay ang pwede lang po natin gawin lamang ay amendment. Hindi po tayo pwedeng mag-revision ng konstitusyon na gagamitin ang People's Initiative. Sapagkat piecemeal lang ang pwede natin gawin. Amendment lang, hindi po revision. Kaya po sana, maging malinaw po ito sa ating taong bayan na ang ating pong winawaksi dito, ngayon, sa ating bulwagan ng Senado, ay yung sinasabing pagtatanggal ng kapangyarihan sa Senado. Yun po ay talagang parang isinawalang bahala na natin ang saligang batas. Kailangan po tindigan natin ang saligang batas sapagkat tayo po ay nanumpa sa harap ng saligang batas. At yun lamang po, mahal na Pangulo, maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang Senado.
Maraming salamat, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Ako'y humahanga din po sa inyo. Alam ko, ang inyong adhikain, advocacy, is to amend the charter to improve the constitution ng ating bansa. At pumirma po kayo dito dahil sa puntong iyon na binanggit mo, na dahil ayaw po makapon ng Senado, ayaw nyo pong walang saysay ang Senado dito sa usaping charter change. Kaya mabuhay po kayo, Senator. Marami po sa amin ay naniniwala din po sa inyo na dapat meron tayong mga kailangan baguhin, pero sa tamang paraan. Maraming salamat. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, next to make a manifestation is our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. I move that he be recognized.
Our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, former Senate President of this August Chamber, this institution that has lasted for 107 years, no other than Senator Coco Pimentel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Ano lang po, maikling inputs kasi meron pa tayong gagawing caucus. I think a colleague will also share his thoughts with us. Well, kanina po sa exchanges for dialogue nila Majority Leader at saka ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, nag-raise ng tanong si Majority Leader, ano ang pwedeng gawin? Sa tingin ko marami tayong pwedeng gawin. Siguro panawagan natin sa ating mga kababayan, yung mga hindi pa nakapirma, huwag kayong pumirma rito sa iniikot na People's Initiative kasi tagong-tago po yung agenda, nakatago sa mga mabibigat at magagandang salita na tungkol sa procedure sa pag-amenda ng Constitution. Hindi po yan ang unod o hindi yan yung substance ng plano. Parang chess po ito, pero madali lang din basahin. Mga 2 to 3 moves ahead lang po. Kita na po natin ano po ang agenda po nila. Kaya yun ang pakiusap natin. Tapos si Majority Leader ay nag-launch na naman ng kanyang online movement na doon naman sa mga nakapirma, pwede po silang mag-manifest na nung kami napapirma, hindi naman niya napaliwanag sa amin ng totoo, ng mabuti, or kami naabutan ng isang bagay na may halaga, bawal po yun, na pera man or isang bagay na may halaga, or napangakuan na may darating na bagay na may halaga in the future. So, posible pong gawin po nila yon. Tapos, siguro na lang, for the consideration of Senator Bato, ang aking opinion is actually meron na pong justiciable controversy. Hindi na po natin kailangan hintayin na yung formal petition kung lalantad na yung mga tao nasa likod nito. Magpapile kasi yan ng petition sa COMELEC. Sa aking palagay, meron na pong justiciable controversy ngayon at yung mga interesado dito sa issue na to, pwede na tayong mag-meeting as on this legal matter kasi tinatanggap ng COMELEC Tinatanggap ng COMELEC yung binibigay ng mga papel na may pirma. So therefore, COMELEC is following a certain procedure. Ang sabi nila may resolution sila. But COMELEC cannot give power unto itself. Therefore, there must have been a law authorizing the COMELEC to receive these signatures and to follow a certain procedure pursuant to the resolution na pinromulgate po ng COMELEC. Kung parehas ang law na iniisip natin, itong law po na ito, kalimutan ko lang po yung RA number, itong Republic Act number na ito, 6735, ay naging subject matter na ng isang kaso, yung nabanggit na rin po, nabanggit yata ni Senator De La Rosa, the defensor case versus COMELEC. At ang conclusion ng Supreme Court doon, that law is insufficient to support a people's initiative. That is in an extended decision. Alam ko na po yung sagot ng whoever, kung sino man yung nasa likod nito, na hindi pa naman klaro kung sino. Parang chess mo ito, na-anticipate na natin yung next move nila. Sasabihin nila, meron daw second case na yung sa Lambino case, yung the original pirma case, na meron daw so-called minute resolution ng Supreme Court on the resolution sa MR, kasi natalo naman yung pirma nun Pero nag-motion for reconsideration yung mga natalo. Hindi rin sila nanalo sa motion for reconsideration, pero sa minute resolution, yan yung mga hindi, yun yung mga maiikling ano na lang mga iikling mga order ng korte. Pero last paragraph doon na sinabi na 10 members of the court are of the opinion that RA 6735 is sufficient to support a people's initiative. Yun po yung counter nila sa ating action. Pero alam na rin po natin yung counter argument po natin doon na ang minute resolution does not form part of the laws of the land under the civil code. Kasi sa civil code, decisions of the Supreme Court form part of the laws of the land. Decisions of the Supreme Court. The Miriam Defensor versus Comelec case is a decision. Okay. Ibabangga ng mga proponents nito is a mere minute resolution. Walang signature ng justices po doon. Clerk of the division. Okay. So, and then, can a decision of a division in a minute resolution overturn a decision of the Supreme Court even if rendered by a division? Hindi. Basic na basic sa Constitution yun. If you reverse something and bank. So, I think we already have a justiciable controversy here and we can act. So we can act, kung makita pa natin, we can act politically by calling on the people to not to sign, and for those who have signed to withdraw their signature. We can act legally in the sense of filing cases to already question what the COMELEC is doing. What is your business receiving all these papers with signatures? At sinasabi nila, they have a ministerial role to play as of the moment. Based on what? On a law already characterized by the Supreme Court as insufficient to support a people's initiative. At saka, Mr. President, as well, since itong people's initiative is an improvement dun sa PIRMA case na sinabi ko. Kasi yung sa PIRMA case before, signatures lang ang sinabit, wala yung, hindi naka-reflect kung ano yung amendment. Okay. In this particular case, naka-reflect ng amendment. Okay. Pero, dahil sa naka-reflect ng amendment, alam na natin yung subject matter. Although yung pagdating sa number of sections affected, iisa lamang, pwedeng sabihin na amendment ito, pero hindi yan ang definition ng amendment. Kung ang pagbabago ay magsasanga-sanga, apektado ang iba-ibang sections ng Constitution, ang konsepto ng bicameral Congress ay apektado, therefore it is not a mere amendment, it is already a revision. Because yung basic structure ng legislative branch ang binabago or kinukontra yung konsepto ng basic structure ng legislative branch. Hence, if it is not an amendment, then it must be a revision. And people's initiative is not available for a revision. So, these are our arguments, Mr. President. So, sa tanong na what can be done, marami ang pwedeng gawin. I'm sure hindi ko na-exhaust yung pwedeng gawin. That's why we're continuing with our caucuses. Baka meron pa tayong ibang mga ideas na lalabas. So without prejudice to further elaboration in some other future speeches, Mr. President, I will end my intervention for today.
Thank you very much to our Minority Floor Leader. Your experience in law and being a bar top-notcher will help us immensely in these cases that we'll be filing. And we'll be filing this together. So maybe stand or adjourn.
We still have one manifestation. Actually, two.
Sir, for the
Our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Hontiveros.
I'm sorry. Our Deputy Minority Floor Leaders recognized. My apologies, ma'am. My apologies.
Walang problema, ug salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Joining in the spirit of the privileged speech of the good gentleman from Davao and Maynista, for the record, Mr. President, a point that I just wish to reiterate sa ating diskusyon ngayong hapon, hindi tsatsa ang lunas sa mga totoong problema ng mga Pilipino ngayon. Klaro ang daing ng taong bayan. Patuloy na pagtaas sa presyo ng bilihin, kakulangan ng trabaho at kita ng manggagawa, sirang sistema ng pampublikong transportasyon at isang pamahalaan na tila walang pananagutan at tugon sa mga totoo nilang pangangailangan. Mandato ng saligang batas na gawing prioridad ng gobyerno ang pagpuksa sa kahirapan, paglaban sa di pagkakapantay-pantay sa lipunan, pagprotekta sa karapatan ng manggagawa at paniniguro na lahat ng Pilipino ay may oportunidad na pagandahin ang ating buhay. Ang solusyon dito, tapat na pamamahala at pagsasabuhay sa mga mandato ng 1987 Constitution. Hindi ang pagwawaksin nito para sa pansariling interes. So, that additional point for the record, Mr. President, og saliwat, salamat kaayo sa good gentleman.
Thank you very much to our distinguished colleague, Senator Hontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last to make a manifestation in this matter is this representation. I move that I be recognized, Mr.
Yes,
President.
our distinguished Deputy Majority Floor Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I share the frustrations of my colleagues in the Senate and the public towards the ongoing People's Initiative. To be clear, I'm not against changing the Constitution per se. I'm open to charter change, especially for the economic provision, for its potential to spur economic development. We are playing catch-up with our ASEAN neighbors. Our priority should be to go full steam ahead on infrastructure development and energy, and in order to make the Philippines competitive and attractive. I believe charter change on economic provisions can help us in this regard. However, we cannot negotiate in bad faith. We cannot play around with the democratic process as important as changing the highest law of the land. And this is how we regard the ongoing petition for People's Initiative. Earlier on, we reached a consensus that we will set aside this type of political circus and instead focus on ensuring that our economic recovery. Nasaan ang palabra de honor? Nasaan ang prioridad natin para sa bayan? Mr. President, the political noise and partisan bickering that will result from this process will only stall our economic recovery. All our efforts in recovering from the pandemic and building a better economy will be for naught if we allow these protracted political squabbles to continue. Charter change will definitely consume much of our time here in the Senate. We will waste our time arguing over voting procedures and other aspects of this political exercise. Marami tayong mga suliranin at hamon na kailangan gawa ng solusyon at bigyan ng pansin. And many of these can be solved without tinkering with the Constitution at this time. Let us do the people's work. Let us work for modernizing our infrastructure and energy, ensuring food security, and revitalizing our economy. All our time, energy, and resources should be focused on these important issues rather than wasting them in a political exercise that will only divide and worse, stall our efforts to ensure a prosperous future for people. Mr. President, nakaka-frustrate. Ang dami nating hinabol ng mga priority bills, measures that are intended to set as our framework and direction towards recovery and making our country competitive once again. Parang lahat ng ating pinagpaguran, pinagpuyatan, ito man nakaraang buwan ay masasayang. This activity will definitely stall all of these efforts. Nakakapanghinayang. Definitely itong charter change, itong usapin na ito, sabi ko nga po, ito 2 araw na tayo halos. Hindi nakausad. Because of this, talking about this issue, nakakapanghinayang. It's frustrating for me, Mr. President. Personally, I was requested by the economic team to defend the public-private partnership, which was not under my committee. I took the challenge because I wanted to help this administration. Kaya lang parang sayang ang lahat kung ito po ipapasok ngayon. Bakit pa tayo nagpagod? Bakit pa tayo nag-aral? Bakit pa tayo nagpuyat para lamang maipasa ang mga ito? Kung ganito rin lang po ang kahinatnan. I'm just sharing with you my frustration because all of us exerted all our efforts here in the Senate. Dito po talagang tayo nag-aaral para lamang may ayos ang lahat ng mga panukala at maging batas na mag-aayos ng ating pumbayan. There is time for everything, Mr. President. Now is not the time for divisive activity like the People's Initiative. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator De La Rosa and all the interpellation and manifestations thereon to the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved. And I'd like to add, I'd like to share the frustration of the distinguished colleague, Senator JVR Sito. Ang aga-aga pa lang ng administrasyon na to, bakit ang dami-dami ng away? I think we should concentrate on moving forward with the economic agenda for the upliftment of poverty of each and every Filipino that's living in abject poverty, 25%. Minimum wage, tulak natin. May rally kanina. Imbis na charter change, pwede bang taas natin ang sweldo? Pasok natin yan. Pasan natin.
Ay ng presyo ng bilihin.
Correct. So I think, my dear colleagues, today has been a very fruitful day for the institution. I think our standing as one in this chamber, not just for our own self-preservation. It's not about self-preservation. It's about looking at the 107 years of history of this hallowed ground, these hallowed halls of the Senate. Nakita natin yung mga personalities na ipinaglaban. The father of Senator Coco Pimentel who fought against injustice and the martial law days, and many others who were jailed and fought for what they believed in and lost their power, fighting for our country and for our nation and for our democratic processes. Huwag natin sampalin sila, makalimutan natin ang kanilang alaala, kanilang memories. No? We forget their memories because of pure personal ambition. That's why I salute all of you. I salute all of you. It is now a test of character. This, gentlemen, is a test of character. Separates the boys from the men. Those who want the toys and those who want to fight for our country. So kayong lahat, mabuhay po kayo. So yesterday, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask them to please first calm down and take your seats and settle down there in the back. We'll be discussing very important matters. Thank you, my dear colleagues. My dear friends, ating mga kababayan, my dear colleagues, yesterday we had a caucus which lasted 3 hours long to discuss the current events that are happening in Philippine politics, particularly on the issue of this People's Initiative. If I may be allowed to read the statement of the Senate on the People's Initiative. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It is an enduring symbol of our democracy, enshrining the foundation of our nationhood and reflecting the consensus of our citizenry. We respect and recognize the people as our sovereign, with the right to call for constitutional amendments. We must, however, guard against any sinister and underhanded attempt to change the Constitution by exploiting our democratic process under the guise of a People's Initiative. This so-called People's Initiative proposes only one change. In acting as a constituent assembly, the Senate and the House shall vote jointly. While it seems simple, my dear friends, the goal is apparent: to make it easier to revise the Constitution by eliminating the Senate from the equation. It is an obvious prelude to further amendments, revisions, or even an overhaul of our entire Constitution. If this PI prospers, further changes to the Constitution can be done with or without the Senate's approval, or worse, even absent all the senators. Should Congress vote jointly in a constituent assembly, the Senate, with its 24 members, cannot cast any meaningful vote against 316 members of the House of Representatives. This singular and seemingly innocuous change in the Constitution will open the floodgates to a wave of amendments and revisions that will erode the nation as we know it. To allow joint voting will destroy the delicate balance between which our hard-won democracy rests. It will change, or destabilize rather, the principle of bicameralism in our system of checks and balances. With this change, the Senate is left powerless to stop even the most radical of proposals. We cannot protect our lands from foreign ownership. We cannot stop the removal of term limits nor no election scenario in 2025 or worse, in 2028. It is ridiculous that the Senate, as a co-equal chamber of the House, which is needed to pass even local bills, will have a dispensable and diluted role in charter change, the most monumental act of policymaking concerning the highest law of the land. Throughout Philippine history, the Senate has always been one of the first targets by those who seek to undermine our country's democracy. Today, the Senate once again stands as a bastion of democracy, as it rejects this brazen attempt to violate the Constitution, the country, and our people. This Senate of the people will not allow itself to be silenced. Signed, yours truly, Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri, Senate President Pro Tem Lauren Legarda, Senate Majority Floor Leader Joel Villanueva, Minority Floor Leader Senator Calino Coco Pimentel, Senators Joseph Victor Ejercito, Mark Villar, Risa Hontiveros, Sani Angara, Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay, Alan Peter Cayetano, Pia Cayetano, Ronald Bato de la Rosa, Francis G. Escudero, Jinggoy Estrada, Sherwin Gatchalian, Christopher Lawrence Go, Manuel Lito Lapid, Aimee Romualdez Marcos, Grace Poe, Bong Revilla, Francis Tol Tolentino, Rafi Tulfo, Cynthia Villar, and last but not the least, my dear colleague and friend and advocate for charter change, Robin Hood Padilla. And I'd like to add in the signature of Robin Padilla that he is for constitutional change. But like all of us, he refuses to allow voting jointly. It should be voted separately. This is the statement that the Senate has made. We are proud of this statement. We stand by our institution, not for our own personal benefit or gain, as I mentioned earlier during the Malolos Congress's 125th anniversary, but for the systems of checks and balances and democracy as a whole. We must stand fast. These attacks on our democratic principles. Sumabuhay ang Senado. May I ask for a minute suspension to ask my colleagues